Hello there, and a very warm welcome to this first lesson of our comprehensive course, How to Play the Game of Chess. In this lesson, I am going to guide you through exactly what a chessboard is. You will learn all about the nature of the individual squares, what the vertical columns, horizontal rows, and the long diagonals are, and also how to identify them using their specific coordinates. Are you ready to begin? Then stay with me. Let's get started. This is a chessboard. It is made up of light squares and dark squares. When you set up a standard chessboard, there should always be a light-colored square on your right-hand side. As a direct result of this, there will always be a dark-colored square on your left-hand side. Whenever you decide to play a game of chess online or perhaps against a computer opponent, you will find that the board will always be automatically set up correctly for you. Specifically, the light square will be positioned on your bottom right-hand side. However, when you are playing on a real physical board, you will need to take extra care to set it up correctly yourself. That is, ensuring the light square is on your right. The entire board is made up of 8 vertical columns, which are also commonly referred to as files. Right here, highlighted in green, we can see a single column that contains a total of 8 individual squares. The name of this column is column A. In addition to that, we also have column B, column C, column D, column E, column F, column G, and column H. Furthermore, besides all of these vertical columns, there are also 8 horizontal rows, which are also commonly known as ranks in this context. So here we have the first row, then the second row, the third row, the fourth row right here, followed by the fifth row, the sixth row, the seventh row, and finally we have the eighth row. Every single horizontal row is clearly identified by a specific number. So on the chessboard, we can see that we have the vertical columns identified by letters, and the horizontal rows identified by numbers. In addition to the columns and rows, we also have the diagonals. So, along this green arrow, we have a large diagonal made up of dark squares. So on this large diagonal, we have 8 squares. In addition to that, we also have another large diagonal line which is composed of these light-colored squares, and this specific diagonal also has a length of 8 squares. Besides the 2 large diagonals, we have many others. This one here is a small diagonal made up of 2 dark squares. Here we also have a small diagonal made up of 2 light squares. And here, how many squares do we have on this diagonal? 1, 2, 3, and 4. That makes 4 squares in total. Now, looking at this other diagonal over here, we have 6 squares. And we can see the same thing right here as well, with 4 squares on the diagonal of light squares. And here also we find 6 squares. Every individual square on the entire chessboard has its own unique identification, much like the specific address of a residential house, which is typically made up of both the street name and the particular house number. On the chessboard, the street name is the column where the square is located, and the house number is the row where the square is found. So to identify exactly which square the white king is currently sitting on, the first thing you should do is look for the letter along the bottom, and then you look for the number along the side to find the coordinates. So as we can see, the white king is positioned on square E1. Now I'm going to go ahead and move the king to a different square on the board. He left the square at E1 and went to the square at F2. Now it is currently black's turn to make a strategic play, O. The black king has just left the starting square at E8 and carefully moved over to the square at F7, yes, F7. Once again, let us take a moment to make another move with the white pieces, and then follow it up with a move for the black side. Now it's your turn to identify the squares. Which square is the white king on, and which square is the black king on? Pause the video and try to figure out the address of these 2 squares. I'll see you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. The white king is on square E3 and the black king is on square G6. Last exercise. Let's move both kings once more. And now, what is the name of each square where the kings are? Pause the video. I'll see you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. The white king is currently positioned on the square of f4 on the board, while simultaneously the black king is located on the square of h7. Very good. We have now come to the conclusion of this lesson regarding the chessboard. And you have learned exactly what the individual squares on the board represent. And you also discovered the correct way to set up your board, ensuring that the light square is always on your right. By now, you have learned all about what columns, rows, and diagonals are in detail. And you have also learned exactly what coordinates are, which is to say, the specific address of each of the individual squares on the board. Thank you very much for staying with me until now. Let's move on to the next lesson. Hello! Welcome to the lesson about the pieces and the starting position. In this lesson, I will talk about the team. I will introduce you to the king, the queen, the rooks, the bishops, the knights, and the pawns. In addition, you will understand what the kingside is, what the queenside is, what the area of defense and the area of attack are when you play as white, and what the area of defense and attack are when you play as black. I will also talk about the small center, the large center, and finally, who starts the game. Are you ready for the lessons in this class? Then stay with me. Let's get started. Let's start with the most important piece, the king. Pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you now. The king essentially represents you on the entire chessboard. The king symbolizes the player themselves. One player will be the white king, the other player will be the black king. The primary and ultimate objective when playing the game of chess is to successfully trap and corner your opponent's king. So if you manage to trap the opponent's king, or in other words, leave him with absolutely no legal moves to make, you've officially achieved checkmate, which simply means you've won the entire game. Don't worry at all, because later on in our comprehensive course, I will be going into much greater detail and providing specific examples about exactly how to deliver a successful checkmate. Now, one of the goals of this lesson is for you to understand what the king is. Since you are the king, you need to lead a team, a group. The most powerful piece on your team is the queen. You have one queen, and your opponent also has one queen. The second most powerful pieces on your team are the rooks. You currently have a pair of rooks, and your opponent also has a pair of rooks. So the queen and your two rooks are what we call the major pieces, meaning they are the specific pieces with the most extensive and far-reaching range of movement across the entire board. In other words, they are the most formidable and influential pieces you have, essentially acting as the ones with the absolute most power and impact during the course of the game. Don't worry, because later on, in a future lesson, I will go into detail about how each of these pieces moves. In addition to the queen and the two rooks, you will have 4 minor pieces, 2 bishops, and also 2 knights. So regarding the main pieces on the board, you have 3 major pieces in play: the queen, which is by far the most powerful, and the 2 rooks. Besides that, you have 4 minor pieces, meaning pieces that are less powerful than the queen and the rook, which are 2 bishops and 2 knights. Your opponent has the same number of major and minor pieces. Besides the pieces, you have the pawns. In total, you have 8 pawns, and your opponent also has 8 pawns that are placed in front of your pieces. Now I'm going to give you a very important tip on how to set up the board. You will need to know this when you play a real game on a physical board. When you play online or against the computer, don't worry, the system will take care of all of this for you. But when you play with a real board, you will need to know how to set up the board. So, as I taught in the previous lesson, you set up the board with the light square on your right. Once the board is positioned, the first piece you will pick up is your queen. So, first on the board, you place the queen. And here's the tip. White queen on a white square, black queen on a black square. After you place the queen, you place the king. So the king goes next to the queen. King next to the queen. On the king's side, you can remember the king's advisor, which is the bishop. So one advisor for the king, one advisor for the queen. After you place the bishops on the board, remember that the rooks go in the corners. Then you place the 4 rooks on the board. The remaining squares are for the knights, so you place the 4 knights on the board. When you finish placing the pieces, you take the pawns and put them in front of the pieces on both sides. There you go, the chessboard is set up with all its pieces. Notice that each piece is occupying a square. Each pawn is also occupying a square. In chess, it is not allowed for 2 pieces to occupy the same square or for 2 pawns to occupy the same square. Each one must always occupy only 1 square. Agreed? So to quickly summarize everything that we have discussed so far, you are the king on the board and you essentially need to lead a specialized team, a strategic squad, just like a professional soccer or volleyball team would operate. And this dedicated team has the primary goal of successfully trapping the opposing king, who is represented by your opponent in this match. If the king is left with no moves, if he is trapped, you deliver checkmate and win the game. Your team is made up of 3 major pieces, those stronger pieces, starting with the queen, which has the most power, and 2 rooks. In addition, you also have 4 minor pieces at your disposal, consisting of 2 bishops and 2 knights, as well as a row of 8 pawns, which unfortunately have quite limited movement power on the board. That's why the pawn is not called a piece. In chess, we separate the pieces from the pawns. One concept I really like about chess is that the members of your team don't die. In chess, you don't kill a pawn or a piece of your opponent. What you do is capture the piece. In other words, if you capture a pawn from your opponent, you remove it from the board. That piece or pawn hasn't died because your team is eternal. When the match finally comes to an end, you begin the entire process once more with all the members. And if you don't want to play anymore, you carefully place every single one of the pieces together with your king in the same box. The chessboard is traditionally divided into 2 distinct sections known as wings. It's as if you were to cut the chessboard in half. The pieces and pawns that are on the king's side are called the king's wing pieces and pawns, as are the squares. Here we also have the king's wing squares. The king's wing is identical for both players. Besides the king's wing, we have the queen's wing. So here are the pawns, squares, and pieces that belong to the queen's wing. In addition to the queen's wing and the king's wing, we have defense areas and attack areas. When you are playing with the white pieces, your defense area is your territory up to the middle of the board. Once you cross the middle of the board, you enter the attack area, meaning you are entering your opponent's territory. When you play with the black pieces, it's the same thing. The defense area is your area, your territory, and when you cross the middle of the board, you enter the attack area, meaning you are entering your opponent's territory. You are entering the white side's territory. A very important concept in chess is the center. This is the small center, which consists of the 4 central squares of the board. Later on in our course, you will understand why it is so important. Besides the small center made up of these 4 squares, we have the large center, which is this entire area of green squares. So we have the small center and the large center. In chess, there is always a draw to decide who will play with the white pieces and who will play with the black pieces. Whoever plays with the white pieces is the one who must start the game. So here we have the start of a game. White goes first. Later on, you will understand how each pawn and each piece moves. Here I am showing you that when white makes a move, black is also required to make a move. In other words, in chess, you cannot skip your turn. You are always required to move a pawn or a piece. White moved their knight forward, and black responded by moving their knight too, and so the game develops. In this classic game, each individual player carefully makes just one move at a time, and you must lead your entire team forward according to the specific tactical strategies you choose, until you finally reach a decisive checkmate and win the match. We've reached the end of this lesson. You learned that the king is your representative on the board, that you have a team with the goal of trapping the opposing king and delivering checkmate. You learned what the kingside is and also what the queenside is. I explained to you the concept of the small center and the large center, and I also explained that the player with the white pieces always starts the game, that moves are mandatory, and each player makes one move at a time. Oh, and also very important, in this lesson, I taught you how to set up the board. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Stay with me. Let's go. Hello there, and welcome to this introductory lesson about pawns. Pawns are by far the most numerous pieces found on the chessboard. At the beginning of a game, each side starts with exactly 8 pawns. When you play online or against a computer, your pawns will be moving up and your opponent's pawns will be moving down. Here, we are playing with the white pieces. But let me flip the board so you can see how it looks when we play with the black pieces. In this case, our pawns are moving up the board and the opponent's pawns are moving down the board. Returning to the previous position with us playing as white, notice that our king is placed on the first rank and our pawns are placed on the second rank. The opponent's king is placed on the 8th rank and their pawns are placed on the 7th rank. This is the perspective of the pieces when we are playing as white. Let me flip the board again. And now you can see that the white pieces have moved to the top of the board. So here, when we are playing as black, it makes more sense to say that our king is on the first rank, our pawns are on the second rank, the opponent's king is on the 8th rank, and their pawns are on the 7th rank. Then you might be wondering, Professor, just a moment ago, in a previous lesson, you explained about columns, ranks, and diagonals, and also about coordinates. And you said that the rank represents the number, and that the columns are represented by letters. That's correct. That's exactly how you find the coordinate of this square. This square here is the h8 square. Our king is on the e8 square. The opponent's king is on the e1 square. But when we talk about the perspective of the pieces and we're playing with the black pieces, the usual thing in chess is to count the ranks according to our perspective. So, for us to coordinate ourselves, we understand that our king is on the first rank and the pawns are on the second rank. But to locate the square where the pawn is, our pawn is on the square. c7. Let's turn the board around again. When we play with the white pieces, our job is easier because our perspective already matches the identification of the ranks on the board. So here, our pawns are on the second rank. Let me give you another example. Let's make a move with the pawn. Our pawn is on the 4th rank. The opponent played his pawn to the square f4. In other words, this pawn is for us. From white's perspective, it is on the 5th rank. Another move with the pawn. Our pawn is on the 3rd rank. And the opponent advanced the pawn into our territory. In other words, he entered the 4th rank. Now let me take the moves back. And let's flip the board. And now we're playing with the black pieces. The opponent makes a move. And from our perspective, since we're playing from the bottom, for us, this rank here is the 5th rank. First rank, second, third, fourth, fifth. Isn't that more obvious now? For the opponent, he understands that this rank is his 4th rank. Pawn to f5. That's the pawn square, and it's on our 4th rank. From our perspective, but for him, the square is f5. The pawn advanced to the 6th. Rank from our perspective, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And from the opponent's perspective, it's the 3rd rank. Now, our pawn has entered the opponent's territory, moving into the 5th rank. Okay? Now, I'll explain to you how the pawn moves and how it captures. There are 2 characteristics in chess: movement and capture. When I say that a pawn has moved, it means I moved it from one square to another. In other words, it has moved. The pawn is the only member of our team that can only move forward. In other words, it can never move backward. Here, we advance the pawn. To the 3rd rank, it will never be able to return to the 2nd rank. It only moves forward. Going back to the initial move, when the pawn is on its starting square, that is, on the 2nd rank, it can choose to advance 1 square, as I just did, or it can choose to advance 2 squares at once. But it can only make this special move when it is on its starting square, which is located on the 2nd rank. From this point forward, it can only move 1 single square at a time. Returning to the position then, regarding this pawn, since it is on its starting square, on the 2nd rank, it can advance 1 square, or it can also advance 2 squares. If it advances 1 square, as it has already moved and left its starting square, on the next move it can only advance 1 square at a time. It no longer has the right to advance 2 squares at once. Only when it is on its starting rank does it have this right. Let me show you the move with the other pawns. This pawn here, which is on f2, can we jump 2 squares? No, we can't, because as I already explained, we can't have 2 pawns or 2 pieces on the same square. Each square has only 1 occupant, so we can't move the pawn 2 squares forward. Here, only 1 square. Going back to the position and this other pawn. Since it has already moved, we can only advance it 1 square. Going back, this other pawn. On c2, can we move it? No, we can't. Not even 1 square or 2 squares, because this pawn here is blocking its path. Our other pawn, the same thing happens with our pawn on a2. Our pawn on a2 is immobile. It can't move to the square on a3, nor can it move to the square on a4. Now this pawn on a3 can go to the square on e4. When we have a pawn that can't move, we say our pawn is blocked. Our pawn on c2 is blocked by the pawn on c3. Notice that in the starting position, all the pawns are free. They can all move 1 square or 2 squares. It's white's turn to start the game, moving the pawn from e2 to e4. Now black moves their pawn from e7 to e5. Now, both pawns are blocked. We can no longer advance our pawn, and the opponent can't advance theirs either, this other pawn. Before I explain how the pawn captures, which is its other characteristic, I want you to do this exercise. We're playing as white, and it's our turn to make a move. Which pawns can move, that is, which ones are not blocked? Pause the video. I'll meet you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. Our pawn here on f6 is blocked. We can't advance the pawn because the opponent's pawn on f7 is preventing our pawn from advancing. But the pawn on f4, it can advance to f5, returning to the position. The same happens with our pawn on c4. It can also advance to c5, returning to the position. But our pawns on c2 and c3 are blocked. We can't move them. In this other exercise, we're playing with the black pieces and it's our turn to make a move. Which pawns can you move? Pause the video and I'll meet you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. Our pawn on h6 has already left its initial position, so it can advance only one square. Returning to the position, our pawn on g7 is still on its initial square, so it can advance one square and it can also advance two squares. Returning to the position, the same applies to our pawn on d7. It can advance one square and it can also advance two squares. Now our pawn on d4 can advance only one square, moving to d3. Our pawn on b7 is blocked because the pawn on b6 is blocking its path. However, this pawn on b6 can move one square. Finally, our pawn on a3 is blocked. We can't advance with the pawn. And how does the pawn capture? We are playing with the black pieces and it's the opponent's turn to make a move. He moves the pawn from f4 to f5, advancing one square. Our pawn on g6 is blocked as it can't move forward, but it can capture the opponent's pawn. Now, going back to the position so you can fully understand the mechanics. The pawn is the only member of your entire team that moves forward in one way, but captures in a different way. To put it another way, this piece can only ever move directly forward, and it is only able to capture an opponent's piece diagonally. If your opponent happens to have a pawn or any other piece located exactly one square to its immediate right, or perhaps one square to its immediate left, provided it is always positioned directly in front of it. There is another pawn capture move in chess called en passant, but this is a special move that I will explain to you later during our training. Now I want to explain other characteristics of this position to you. Our pawn on g6 is residing on the square g6. In other words, it is occupying this square. Since it captures diagonally, it is attacking the square on f5 and it is attacking the square on h5. Since it is attacking this square and it is our turn to move, we have the option to capture this pawn. We are not obligated to make this capture. If we wanted to, we could move our king, or we could also advance this other pawn. But since we decided to capture this pawn, what happened? Once this pawn has been captured, it is removed from the board. When you are playing on a real physical board, rather than on a computer or an online platform, you must first touch the opponent's piece that you intend to capture. First, you must carefully remove the opponent's piece from the board, and immediately following that action, you take your own piece and place it directly onto the exact square where the other one was previously located. Rewinding the move, if you happen to be playing a match on the computer, you will simply drag your pawn forward, capturing the opponent's pawn and occupying the specific square where it is currently sitting. Automatically, the system removes this opponent's pawn, which was here on this square, and takes it off the board, returning to the position. However, this is actually very important to keep in mind when you are playing a game on a physical, real-life board, Aseje. I have personally seen many people take their own chess piece on a real board, and then slowly drag it right over the top of their opponent's piece or pawn. Sometimes they even end up knocking over that pawn on the board, which you cannot do. In a real chess game, you must pick up the opponent's piece and place it off the board. Then you pick up your own piece, lift it up, and place it on that square. You don't need to drag the piece. You simply pick it up, lift it, and place it on the new square it will occupy. Agreed? So now I have an exercise for you. We're playing with the white pieces and it's our turn to make a move. And you should identify which of your pawns can capture an opponent's pawn. Pause the video. I'll meet you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. This pawn of ours on b4 can capture the pawn on a5. It can also capture the pawn on c5. Besides that, it has the option to advance. As for our pawn on c4, it is blocked and has no capture options. Now our pawn on d5 can capture the pawn on e6. If we didn't want to capture this pawn, we could also advance it. This pawn of ours on e4 cannot capture any other pawn. It can only advance, and finally our pawn on g4. It cannot capture, nor can it even advance, returning to a previous position. Now I want to introduce you to a superpower granted only to the pawn in this very position. I want to show you a power that the pawn possesses. Only the pawn has this power. Here, white advances the pawn, we capture the pawn. White can advance their pawn or capture ours. They choose to capture our pawn. Here we can make a move with our king, which you will learn in another lesson. We can't advance our pawn to b6 because it's blocked. But we can advance the pawn to a4. The opponent plays c5, advancing the pawn. Here he threatens to capture our pawn or advance. So we capture the pawn. The opponent captures our pawn. And we advance the pawn to a3. The opponent plays pawn to b6. So we advance our pawn to a2. The opponent advances to b7. And now our pawn reaches the 8th rank. And when it gets there, on the 8th rank, whether by a normal move or by a capture move, you are required to replace the pawn with a piece of your choice. So it can be either a queen, a rook, also a knight, or a bishop. But in 99.9% of cases, the chosen piece is always a queen because she is the strongest piece on the board. There are some specific cases in which it might be better to choose another piece instead of a queen. I will also show you some examples of these situations during our training. For now, it's important for you to know about this superpower. This is a superpower that only the pawn has. It can transform into another piece, except a pawn, because it cannot become a pawn again, since pawns, according to chess rules, cannot go back. And it also cannot transform into a king, because there is only one king on the board, which is represented by you, the player. So now here's an interesting fact. Since we have 8 pawns on the board, how many queens can we have? 9. If, for example, all 8 pawns are promoted, we can have 8 queens coming from the pawns, and one more, which is the original queen you already have. Adding it all up, that's 9 queens. Of course, in practice, this is uncommon, because promotions are not very frequent. Many pawns during their journey to the 8th rank are exchanged, blocked, or captured. Pawn promotion usually happens only in the endgame, when there are few pieces left in play. So just as you can have 9 queens, you can also, instead of exchanging the pawn for a rook, you could have 10 rooks, 10 bishops, or 10 knights, or, who knows, make various combinations as you prefer. Now here is a very useful little tip for you. When you are playing on a live board, a real physical board, and you find that you want to have an extra queen for a promotion, but if your specific chess set doesn't happen to come with that extra queen, a very common and traditional practice among players is to simply take a rook that may already be out of the game and turn it completely upside down. So by doing this, you can easily use that upside down rook as your makeshift extra queen for the rest of the match. But this usually happens with older boards. Many new boards already come with one, with an extra queen in case you have a pawn that was promoted. We've reached the end of this lesson. If you're still unsure about how the pawn moves or how it captures, please watch this lesson again, as I explained in detail all the characteristics of the pawn except for the special move. En passant, which I will teach you in another lesson later on. For now, what you need to know about the pawn is enough for us to continue with our training. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Stay with me. Let's go. Hello there, and a very warm welcome to this comprehensive lesson about the king in chess. In this specific lesson, I am going to teach you exactly how the king moves across the board, the specific way in which he captures the opponent's pieces. And I will also provide you with several helpful exercises to practice, so that you can easily memorize everything you learn in this session. Finally, to wrap things up, I will introduce you to the fundamental game of king and pawns versus king and pawns. This is a game you can already practice with someone you know, who already knows how to play chess or who is learning along with you. So stay with me. Let's get started. The king is the leader of all the pieces. Think of the king as your own personal representative on the board. The king is the single most important piece that is never allowed to be captured or removed during the entire game. Therefore, the king will always stay positioned right there on the chessboard until the very end of the match. He will never be removed from the board, even when he is checkmated. The king is the most important piece, but not the most powerful. The most powerful piece is the queen, whose moves and how she captures I will teach you in a future lesson. If your king is trapped by your opponent, then you have been checkmated and lost the game. If you manage to trap your opponent's king, you are the one who delivered checkmate and you have won the game. Don't worry, in a future lesson I will explain in detail how to give a check and also a checkmate. The goal of this lesson is to teach you how the king moves and how he captures. The king can move in all directions, but he is the slowest piece on the board. He can only move one square per turn. Remember, in the last lesson I taught you how the pawn moves and how it captures? And the pawn, from its starting square, can jump up to 2 squares in one move. The king cannot. The king can only move one single square in any direction per turn, except for the unique special move called castling, in which he is permitted to move 2 squares toward a rook. Castling is a very important move in chess, as it serves to protect your king, and later on I will teach you about it in this course. The white king is on the square e3 and he is attacking 8 squares around him. It's white's turn to move, king to f2. Now it's black's turn to play. The king also has 8 available squares he can occupy. King to e7. Now white also has 8 squares and plays king to g2. Black also has 8 squares for their king to go to and plays king to d8. Again, with 8 available squares, king to h1. Now it's black's king's turn to play, and since the king is on the edge, notice that his movement is now restricted. He only has 5 squares to move to. King to d7, once again increasing his options for the next move with 8 available squares. And here, the white king has positioned himself in the corner of the board and he has only 3 available squares. Consequently, as the king moves further away from the central squares, toward the outer sides or the very corners of the board, he experiences a loss in his overall mobility and influence. When the game reaches the end, with few pieces left on the board, it is very important for the king to stay active, attacking as many squares as possible. At the beginning of the game and also in the middle game, it is important for the king to stay safe on the first rank, protected by his pawns and also some pieces. In this example, we have only the two kings on the board. So if a game ends like this, the match is a draw. Later on, I will talk about other cases of a draw. This is the starting position of the game. Notice that in the starting position, the king is immobile. He can't make any moves because he is blocked by his pawns and two pieces. In this example, we are playing with the black pieces and the opponent with the white pieces. It's the opponent's turn to move, and notice that the opponent's king is attacking 5 squares. The other 3 squares are occupied by his own pawns. He plays king to d4. Our king is attacking 3 squares and 2 squares are occupied by our pawns. We play king to d7. The opponent's king has 6 squares being attacked by the king, which he can move to, and 2 squares are occupied by his own pawns. Since it's his turn to move, he can choose to move his king or one of his pawns. Since the lesson is about the king, let's focus on the king's moves. King to c4. Now it's our turn to make a move. Our king has 5 squares he can go to. One is occupied by our pawn, and these 2 squares, e6 and c6, our king cannot occupy because the opponent's pawn is attacking those 2 squares. If our king were to go to one of those squares, he would be in check. And one of the rules of chess is, you cannot put your king in check because he would be under threat, and that is a move that is not allowed in chess. So in this position, we can't go here because the pawn is occupying the square, nor to these 2 squares, because we would be putting our king in check since they are being attacked by the opponent's pawn. The options we have are these 5 squares. King to d6, and our king is attacking the square on c5. He is also attacking the pawn that is being protected by the king. So now white can't bring their king to the square on c5 because our king is attacking that square, so they move their king to b5. Notice that the king has left his pawn unprotected. Our king can't go to these 3 squares because they are being attacked, but he can capture this pawn. The king captures in the same way that he moves, so he will capture the pawn, and that pawn will be removed from the board. The opponent now plays pawn to f4. Notice that both kings are attacking these 3 squares, so they will never be right next to each other. There will always be a minimum distance of 1 square between them. This is the rule of opposition, and it applies only to kings. So whichever king tries to enter the squares c4, c5, or c6 will be violating the rule of opposition. Here, it's important to highlight that among these 3 squares, the most important one is the central opposition square, which is c5. The central opposition square is essential for basic checkmates, which I will teach you in detail in a later lesson. King to e4. Here, the opposing king cannot occupy these squares because they are being attacked by our pawns. So he moves his king to c5. We can't go to these 2 squares because of the rule of opposition between the kings. And even if that king weren't on this square and was on the other one, this square here is also being attacked by the opponent's pawn. So this square is being attacked by both the king and the pawn. This other square is being attacked by this pawn. We can't capture this pawn because it is being protected by the pawn on e3. So the king can never capture a pawn or an opponent's piece that is being defended, because if he captured this pawn on the next move, he would be captured by this other pawn. And that is a move that is not allowed in chess. So the king can take or capture any pawn or piece that is unprotected except for the opponent's king. Here then, we can capture this pawn on e3, which is completely unprotected. We capture the pawn. The opposing king has 4 available squares. King to d5, and now we can capture this other pawn. The king captured the pawn on f4. Going back to the position, here for white, instead of moving the king, the best move would be to advance the pawn, because in this case, our king would no longer be able to reach that pawn in time. Then it reaches the 8th rank for white, or the 1st rank for black, which is our rank, and it is promoted to a queen. And in this endgame, the opponent has enough advantage to win the game and deliver checkmate. In a future lesson, I will teach you in detail how to checkmate with king and queen against king. Now I have an exercise for you. Which squares can the black king move to? Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Let's go to the solution. The black king cannot move to these 3 squares, because here we have the rule of opposition between kings. So we can move to any of these squares here. And in this exercise, we are playing with the white pieces. It's our turn to make a move. Which squares can our king move to? Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Let's go to the solution. The king cannot move to this square because of the rule of opposition. He can't go to this one either. It's being attacked by the pawn. This other square is being attacked by this pawn. This one is also being attacked by this pawn. So the squares our king can move to are these free squares, and he can also capture this pawn. Now, one more exercise for you. The last one. We're playing with the white pieces. Which squares can our king move to? Pause the video. I'll meet you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. Our king can't go to these 2 squares because they're occupied by our pawns. Can he capture this pawn? No, he can't, because it's being protected by this pawn. And can he capture this pawn? No, he can't either. It's being protected by these other 2 pawns. He can go to this square because it's not being threatened. This other square is being threatened by this pawn, so we can't go there. This other square is being threatened by this pawn as well, so we also can't go there. And is this pawn being protected? No, it's not. So here, we can capture this pawn. Lastly, to wrap up our lesson about the king, I'm going to teach you a fun, strategic game that you can play with a relative or a friend. This is the battle of king and pawns versus king and pawns, which is a great way to practice everything we've learned. What are the rules of the game? You take a board and place the pawns and the king in their starting positions. The board should have the light square on the right, and white always goes first. Then you can finally start playing the game. Carefully move your pawns forward, and then move the king according to your specific strategy and overall plan. Keep in mind that this is a fictional game. I am simply explaining the objectives so that you can understand the rules and play it with your relatives or friends. The primary and main goal of this interactive game is for you to practice everything that I have just taught you regarding the mechanics of pawn movement and capture, as well as the essential rules governing king movement and capture in a real match. At the end of the game, the winner is the one who manages to capture all of the opponent's pawns, or succeeds in advancing a pawn to the 8th rank and promoting it to a queen. So, in this example, black ultimately won the game because they managed to promote their pawn into a queen, slightly before white was able to do the same. Returning to the starting position, in this game, the winner is the one who manages to capture all of their opponent's pawns, or the one who first manages to promote a pawn to a queen. If you don't have a board or someone to practice with, that's not a problem at all. This is an optional activity, and if you are able to do it, that's great because you'll be practicing the lessons I've taught you. But if you can't practice, as I said, That's no problem at all. We've reached the end of this lesson. I taught you how the king moves, how the king captures, and I taught you the rule of opposition. You also learned that when both kings are left alone on the board, the game is a draw. I gave you a variety of helpful exercises to practice. And finally, I taught you the strategic game of king and pawns versus king and pawns. This is an entirely optional but highly beneficial game that you can practice at your own pace to help you reinforce and memorize the essential lessons and strategies you've learned so far in this course. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Stay with me. Let's go! Hello there, and a very warm welcome to this comprehensive lesson all about the queen. In this lesson, you will learn exactly how the queen moves across the board, the specific way she captures opponent pieces, and I am also going to provide you with several interactive exercises so you can thoroughly practice and reinforce everything that you have learned in this lesson. Ready? If you are ready, then please come along with me. The queen is the piece with the greatest range of mobility and movement in the game of chess, which is exactly why she is considered the most potentially damaging and the most powerful piece on the board. She moves freely along the horizontal ranks, the vertical files, and also across the long diagonals. You might clearly remember that she moves in the exact same directions as the king does, but the king is limited and moves only one single square at a time. In contrast, the queen, on each and every move, can go as many squares as she wants in a single straight line. In this specific position, the queen is placed right in the center, so this is exactly where she exerts the most power. She is currently attacking 27 different squares, including all these squares marked here in green. Now she has moved away from the smaller center and has successfully entered the larger center area of the board. Notice that her mobility power is a bit less now. She is attacking 25 squares. The opponent moves the king to d8 and we move our queen to b3. Here she is attacking 23 squares. The king moves to the d7 square, while the queen slides over to a3, firmly positioned right on the edge of the board. From here, she is now attacking a total of 21 squares. King to e6, queen to g3, king to d7, queen to e5, returning again to the center, king to c8, queen to a1 in the corner of the board. The queen cannot jump over other pieces, neither opponent's pieces nor her own team's pieces. So, in this position, the queen is attacking 7 squares, plus 7 squares, plus 3 squares. And so that's 17 squares. If the king were not on the e1 square and was, for example, on the e2 square, the queen in the corner of the board would be attacking 21 squares, much fewer than the 27 squares when she is positioned on one of these central minor squares. When there are more pieces on the board, in this position we have more pawns, the queen's movement becomes much more limited. Here she attacks only 4 squares. It's our turn to make a move. Let's go with queen to c1, attacking 2 pawns, the pawn on c5 and the pawn on h6. Because the queen is unable to jump over other pieces on the board, she is currently not attacking these specific squares over here. The white pawn is effectively blocking the queen's direct line of attack on these squares. In response, the opponent plays their pawn to the d6 square, which successfully defends the pawn that was previously left unprotected. So, if the queen captures the pawn, then we lose the queen, which is not a good move for us since we would be trading the queen, our most mobile piece, for a pawn that has very little mobility. Going back to the position, the best move for us is to capture this other pawn. Now we are threatening to capture this pawn on g6, and the opponent has no way to protect this pawn. He plays king to c7 and we capture the pawn. Now we are threatening to capture this other pawn and the opponent defends it. So, in summary, As you have learned, the queen moves and captures like the king, with the difference that she is not limited to just one square per move. She can move as many squares as she wants in any straight line. This makes her the most versatile piece on the board, capable of sweeping across the entire distance in a single turn. In the initial position on the board, the queen is immobile. Her mobility is zero, just like the king's. Now let's move on to an exercise. Let's take a good look at this position. Which squares can our queen not go to? In other words, if she goes there, she will be captured. Pause the video. I'll meet you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. This pawn on h7 is attacking this square on g6. So if the queen moves to g6, the pawn captures the queen. So this square here is not allowed. This square right here, it's exactly the same thing, because the queen is currently attacking this square. She also attacks this square, is also attacking this square, and is attacking this square. So all of these are specific squares where we simply can't move our queen. Continuing to carefully analyze this specific row, we can see there is also a square where our queen cannot safely go. This is just like this other square over here, which is currently located on the queen's diagonal. And we must also consider this other square right here as well. On this diagonal, the two queens also cross paths at the square b7. So all these squares that I marked are squares where our queen can't go because she would be captured either by the opponent's queen or by the pawn. Now consider this other position. Which specific squares can the white queen not safely move to? That is, on which squares would she be captured by the opponent's pieces? Pause the video. I'll meet you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. Let's start by analyzing with the opponent's king. He is attacking this square, this one, and this one, which are all squares that our queen can access. So here, our queen can go because the opponent's king would capture the queen. This square is being threatened by the pawn, and this other one by the other pawn. Here as well, he attacks this square, and this other one is being attacked by both pawns. So our queen can't go to any of these squares because she would be captured. Besides these squares, the queen can't capture this pawn because it is protected by this one. She also can't capture this pawn because it is protected, and this other pawn is also protected, so she can't capture them. We've reached the end of this lesson. You have learned how the queen moves and how she captures. So now you finally understand exactly why the queen is considered the most versatile and powerful piece in the entire game of chess. In addition to teaching about movement and capturing, I gave you 2 exercises so you can reinforce the lessons I'm sharing with you. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Stay with me. Let's go. Hello there, and a very warm welcome to this comprehensive lesson about check and checkmate. In this lesson, you are going to learn exactly what a check is, the 3 specific ways that you can use to defend yourself from a check, and you will also learn what checkmate is. Furthermore, I will give you several detailed exercises to help you clearly distinguish between check and checkmate, and finally, I will present you with an exciting mini battle between king, queen, and pawns versus king, queen, and pawns. This is an incredibly important and fundamental lesson for your progress, and I strongly advise you to do all the exercises and stay with me right through until the very end of the video. Are you ready? Then let's get started. The objective of the game of chess is focused on attacking the king. If a player attacks the opponent's king and the king cannot defend itself, then there is a checkmate situation, and the game is over, with victory for the player who attacked the king. Besides checkmate, there are 2 other ways to end the game, by draw or resignation. In resignation, the game is won by the player whose opponent declares that they are abandoning the game. This immediately ends the game. We will look at the cases of a draw later in another lesson. You've already seen one of them, where both kings were left alone on the board. Since neither can attack the other because of the opposition rule, the game ended in a draw. Now, let's talk about check. Every time an opposing piece attacks the square where the king is, we say the king is in check. In this example, the queen is attacking the square where the king is, so the king is under attack. Therefore, he is in check. Since the king cannot be captured, he is required to get out of check, that is, to defend himself from the attack. There are 3 ways for him to get out of check. I will now teach you the first way, which is to capture the piece, giving the check with the king himself or with another piece. In this example, the king is being attacked by the queen. Can the king capture this queen? No, he cannot. And our other queen, can she attack the attacking queen? Yes, she can. So we capture the queen and eliminate the threat of check. So this first option, which is to capture the attacking piece, is often the first option you should consider, because besides eliminating the threat, you also remove a piece. The second way to escape check is to move the king to a square where he is no longer in check. In this example, the queen is attacking the square where the king is, so he is in check. Which of these squares can the king move to where he will not be in check? If he moves to f1, he remains in check. If he moves to h1, he also remains in check because the queen controls that rank. Here, on h2, he can't go because of the opposition rule. Here, on g2, he can't go either. And what about f2? That square is available, so the king can escape to f2 and thus he gets out of check. The third way to get out of check is to block or interpose a piece between the king and the piece giving the check. So, in this example, the queen is giving check, attacking the square where the king is, and we have the option to block the check with our own queen. In this way, we eliminate the threat of the check. Queen captures queen, king captures queen, and the game is drawn. Going back to the initial position, as we will see later on when discussing the movement and capture of the knight is the only attacking piece that, when it gives check, you won't be able to block or interpose to stop the check. But we'll see that later on. Now, it's important for you to understand these 3 ways to get out of check. Shall we review them? You can capture the piece that is attacking either with your own king or with another piece or pawn. You can move the king to a square where it is no longer in check. And the third way is that you can block the check by placing a piece or a pawn between the king and the piece giving the check. There are positions sometimes where you can choose among the 3 ways to get out of check. Sometimes you only have 2 or even just 1 option. There isn't a better way. Depending on the situation, one method may be better than another. In this position, the queen is also attacking the square where the king is, so it's check. Is it possible to capture the piece that is attacking the king? No, we can't capture it with the king, and we also don't have any other piece or pawn that can capture the queen. The second option, can we move the king to a safe square? No, it's not possible. The opposing king has taken control of the central opposition square. As a result, he controls these 2 squares. So, we can't move the king to any of these 3 squares. And we also can't escape to the squares on f1 or h1 because we would still be in check. And the third way, is it possible to block the queen's attack with a pawn or a piece? We don't have that option either. So, in this specific case, since absolutely none of the 3 possible ways could eliminate the check, the white king finds himself completely trapped. In other words, this situation is what we call checkmate, or you can simply say it's mate, and the entire game has officially come to an end. You can notice that there is no checkmate without a check. The word check means that the king is under attack. The word mate means that there is no defense against this threat. Now, I've prepared several exercises for us to practice. In all of them, you should determine whether it is a check or a checkmate. In this position, is it check or checkmate? Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Let's go to the solution. We can't capture the queen because the queen is being protected by the king. The king is being attacked from the adjacent square, so we can't block the check. And which squares can the king escape to? The square at c1 is not possible because it's being attacked by the queen. The square at b2 isn't possible either, and neither is a2. And the square at a1? Can he escape? Yes, he can escape. Now next, it's black's turn to play, and the queen moves to the square at b2 and delivers checkmate. Now we can't capture nor block, and there is no square we can escape to. In other words, it's checkmate. In this other exercise, check or checkmate. Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Can we capture the piece that is giving the check? Yes, we can. So that was just a check. In this other exercise, check or checkmate. Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Let's go to the solution. Can we capture? No, we can't. Can we block? Also no. Do we have a square we can escape to? No, we don't. So checkmate. In this other exercise, check or checkmate. Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Can we capture the piece? No, we can't. Do we have a square to escape to? Yes, we do. The square at f2. Can we block? No, we can't. So the best option here is to escape. So that was just a check. And now check or checkmate. Pause the video. Let's go to the solution. Can we capture? No, we can't. Can we block? Neither can we. Can we escape? We can't escape either. So it's a checkmate. This next one, is it a check or a checkmate? Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Let's go to the solution. Can we capture the piece that is attacking? Yes, we can, with the queen. It was just a check. Going back to the position, notice that only this way is available because we can't block the check and we also can't escape since our own pawns are blocking the escape squares. In this other position, check or checkmate. Pause the video. Let's go to the solution. Can we capture the piece? No, we can't. Can we escape? We can't do that either. Can we block? Yes, we can block. So it's just a check. And this other one, check or checkmate. Pause the video. Let's go to the solution. Can we capture the piece? No, we can't. Can we escape? We can't either. Can we block? Yes, we certainly can. We block the check. But right after, does it help at all? No, the queen captures the queen and now delivers checkmate. In this other position, check or checkmate. Pause the video. Let's go to the solution. Can we capture the piece? No, we can't. Can we block? Yes, we can with the queen. The queen captures the queen, we lose our queen, and here we escape to the square at h2. Going back to the position, besides blocking the check by interposing a piece, is there another way to escape the check? Yes, by moving to the square at h2. So here, we have two ways to escape the check. Which is better? Block the check with the queen or move to the square at h2. We saw that blocking the check is a very bad choice because that way we lose the queen. The best option is to move to the square at h2. And now this last exercise. Is it check or checkmate? Pause the video. Let's go to the solution. Can we capture the piece? No, we can't. Can we escape with the king? We can. To the square at h1. Can we block the check? Yes, we can do that too. The opponent didn't want to trade queens, even with a two-pawn advantage. And he decided to move the queen to the square at f6. Now it's our turn to make a move. Can you visualize what move we can make? Pause the video. Let's go to the solution. Look at this beautiful move we can make. Queen to a8 giving a check. Can he capture our queen? No, he can't. Can he escape? He can't do that either. Can he block? He can, but only for a short time. We successfully capture the queen and deliver a final checkmate. To wrap up this entire lesson, there is a very special optional activity you can try out right now if you happen to have a physical chessboard nearby and also a relative or a close friend who is willing to play this exciting mini battle with you. This mini battle is played between the king, the queen, and the pawns against the opposing king, queen, and pawns. It is a fantastic way to practice everything we have learned today in a real-world setting. The winner is whoever manages to deliver checkmate. So since this is just an example, I won't analyze this game here as that's not the goal. The goal of this lesson has already been achieved, which was to explain check and checkmate to you. The black pieces are currently threatening to bring their queen into the square at h4. See. So let's strategically reposition our own queen to the square at h5. Effectively controlling that square and neutralizing the threat. Now we are putting pressure on two of their pawns simultaneously, the pawn on e5 and the pawn on h7. Queen to f6, defending the pawn on e5. But we can capture the undefended pawn on h7 and then threaten to bring our queen in to give a check. King to e7, eliminating this threat, pawn to c3, pawn to b5, queen to h3, considering a route to attack this other pawn, queen to g6, threatening to take the pawn on e4 and thus giving a check, pawn to f3, protecting the pawn, pawn to a5, king to f2, queen to b6, giving a check, king to e2, pawn to b4, queen to g4, threatening to capture the pawn, pawn captures pawn, pawn captures the other pawn, the threat of capture still remains and the pawn advances to eliminate this threat since now the pawn is doubly defended by the queen and also by this other pawn. Queen to g5 giving a check, king to e6, queen to g4, check, king to e7, pawn to a4, queen to a6, check, king to f2, queen to c4, threatening to capture this pawn, queen to h4, check, king to e6, queen to h3, check, king to e7, queen to h8, threatening to capture this pawn. Pawn to d6, defending the pawn. The threat to capture this pawn remains. Queen to c8, threatening to capture this other pawn. If the queen moves away next, she will stop defending this pawn and then we can capture here. White can capture. Queen captures the pawn. Queen also captures the pawn and gives a check. King to e6, queen to c8, check. King to e7, king to g3, queen to b5, queen to c7, check. Queen to d7. The queens are exchanged and now the pawn is free to promote. King to f2, pawn to a4, king to e1, pawn to a3, king to d1, pawn to a2, king to c2. We can't get there in time. The pawn is promoted to a queen. The game is close to ending. Pawn to g4, queen to f1, threatening to capture the pawn. Pawn to f4, pawn captures pawn, pawn to e5, pawn to f3, pawn to e6, giving a check, pawn captures pawn, pawn to d4, queen to e2, check, king to b3, pawn to f2, king to a3, pawn is promoted to another queen, pawn to d5, pawn captures pawn, pawn on h3, queen to a1 giving check, king to b4, and queen to b2 delivering check. Can we capture the queen? No, we can't. Can we block the check? No, we can't either. Do we have a square to escape to? No, we don't. This square here is being attacked by this pawn, and our pawn here is also blocking a square, but even if this pawn weren't here, the queen would be attacking this square. So this is checkmate. As you can clearly see, this is just a short instructional demonstration of the game, so you can fully understand exactly how you can go about playing. with your family members or your close friends. Here, we didn't make the best moves, neither for white nor for black. Several intentional mistakes were made on purpose to significantly speed up this game. But the most important thing to remember is that it actually helped you review the various lessons you've learned throughout this course. This approach ensures you truly understand the core concepts. We've reached the end of this lesson. In this lesson, I taught you what check is and the 3 ways you can defend against check. You also learned the concept of checkmate. We did several exercises so you could understand whether it's check or checkmate. And finally, I presented you with this mini battle that you can already try out from now on if you want. It's an optional battle. With that, we wrap up this lesson. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. So, let's go. Stay with me. Hello, welcome to the lesson on stalemate by drowning. In this lesson, you will learn what stalemate by drowning is. In addition, you will understand the difference between stalemate by drowning and checkmate. Are you ready to start? Then come with me. As you have learned, this is a checkmate. The queen is attacking the square where the king is located. He can't capture it, can't block the check, and also can't escape. In this position, it's white's turn to play. Notice that the king is not being attacked. That is, he is not in check. If he moves to the square at h2, he will put himself in check. He also can't go to the square at g1 nor to the square at g2. Also note that the king is alone on the board. There are no other pieces or pawns he can move. So if it's white's turn to play and no legal move can be made, then what can be done? In this position, nothing can be done. In this specific situation, we say that the king is stalemated, which means that the game ends in a draw. This is a very common defensive resource that is often used by players to avoid an otherwise certain defeat. Therefore, a stalemate occurs when the player whose turn it is unable to make any legal move, yet their king is not in check. This means he cannot move a single piece, nor can he advance a pawn, and he cannot move the king to any adjacent square without putting himself in danger, and yet he is not in check. Therefore, the game will be declared a draw, since the specific conditions for a checkmate have not occurred, leaving neither player as the winner. Here we see the exact same position as before, but with one key difference. White now has an extra pawn. It is currently white's turn to make a move. And now I ask you, is it a draw? It is not a draw. White has 2 legal moves. They can move the pawn to the square on a3 or a4. So move the pawn. And now black can choose how to deliver checkmate. So now, checkmate. At this point in the game, I have added one single extra pawn down here on the a3 square. In your opinion, is this position a draw? Yes, the king cannot move and is not in check. The pawn also cannot move. So this is a draw. And now draw or checkmate. Pause the video. Let's go to the solution. This is a draw because the king cannot make any legal moves and there are no pawns or other pieces. And this position, draw or checkmate. Pause the video. This position is checkmate because the king is in check, cannot capture, block, or escape. This other position, draw or checkmate. It's white's turn to play. Pause the video. It's a draw because there is only the king. He is not in check and has no legal moves available. And this position, draw or checkmate. Pause the video. This position is also a draw. This queen controls the b file. This other queen is controlling the 7th rank. The king is not in check. There are no other pieces or pawns on the board, and he is unable to make a legal move. And the last exercise, draw or checkmate. It's black's turn to play. Pause the video. Let's go to the solution. Since black has a legal move available, they decide to promote the pawn to a queen. And now white has 3 different moves to choose from, all of which will lead directly to checkmate. For example, moving the queen to the c8 square results in a checkmate. Going back to the position just to show you the precautions we need to take. When the pawn was promoted to a queen, the queen started to control this diagonal. So if white played queen to b7, thinking it was checkmate, look what happens. Black captures the queen, giving a check. The king escapes to the square at a5. The queen goes to b3. The only available square is king a6, king b8. The only available square, king a5, king c7 to free up the square at a6 again. And now, black can successfully deliver a powerful checkmate by placing the queen on the square b6 or by simply moving the piece back to its previous position. Or alternatively, also deliver checkmate with the queen on the square a4. That's also a checkmate. We have now officially reached the very end of this comprehensive lesson. By now, you should have a very clear understanding of exactly what a stalemate is in chess. If you happen to be playing with the stronger side, especially in these specific examples I have just shown you involving the king and queen, you must always be extremely careful to leave at least one square free for the opposing king. This is critical if he is alone on the board, or if he is the only piece that can actually make a legal move. If you find yourself playing with the significantly weaker side, perhaps playing only with your lone king, then you definitely know that you should persist and keep fighting until the very end, right up until the moment you are finally checkmated. You should never give up on the match even if you are left with nothing but your lone king on the board. Remember that you always have an opportunity to secure a stalemate or a draw. In many competitive school settings and various amateur tournaments, this specific type of draw by stalemate is actually very common. I have even personally witnessed players with a remarkably good level of chess skill make this exact mistake and let a certain victory slip right through their fingers, especially when they are under intense psychological pressure due to having very little time left on their game clock. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Stay with me. Let's go! Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this chess lesson. Today, I am going to show you exactly how to apply, step by step, a checkmate when you have the king and queen against a lone king. In this lesson, I will teach you 2 distinct and effective methods for delivering this checkmate. You will also learn fundamental concepts such as the attacking piece, the guard, and how to coordinate your pieces effectively. Helper piece and hunter piece. In addition, you will understand everything step by step. You will also learn step by step how to drive the opponent's king to the edge of the board when he is positioned in the center, which are the most difficult cases. Are you ready to begin? So, stay with me, let's go. At the beginning of this training, in a previous lesson, I explained to you that we have major pieces, which are the queen and the rook, and minor pieces, which are the knight and the bishop. And of course, we also have the pawns. Now you will gain a much deeper and more comprehensive understanding of exactly why the queen is considered a major piece. Besides being the single most formidable and influential piece on the entire board, possessing the unmatched range of movement and greatest mobility, she can also, when strategically assisted by her own king, successfully deliver a decisive checkmate to the opposing king. This specific type of checkmate can only be successfully delivered when the opposing king is positioned on one of the squares at the outermost edges of the board. The very first checkmate pattern that I am going to teach you today is the one where your own king is very active, providing essential support and acting as a powerful guard for your other pieces. In this example, he is in opposition. This is the central opposition square, and the king guards these three squares through the rule of opposition. So in this position, we say that the king is acting as a guard. He guards three escape squares. The queen is also acting as a guard. She is guarding the escape square on e1 and also on g1. But besides being a guard, she is also a hunter. A hunter is the piece that delivers the checkmate. Note that other similar positions can also occur. But the king is always on the edge of the board. Our king acts as a guard, and the queen as both a guard and a hunter, delivering the check. This is another example of checkmate using this same pattern. The kings are in opposition. This is an example where our king failed to get the opposition and gave it up, an escape square to the opposing king. So in this example, it's not checkmate. Here's another pattern for you to deliver checkmate. The opposing king will also be trapped on the edge of the board. The difference is that the queen will take on all the roles. She will guard the squares and also deliver the checkmate in this position. In this example, our king is not acting as a guard, but rather as a helper. So, his role is to help the queen deliver checkmate because he needs to protect the queen so she doesn't get captured. Because the queen alone, without the king's help, or at least without the help of another piece, or even the help of opposing pieces, she can't deliver checkmate. In this other example, it's not mate because the queen didn't guard the escape square on c1. The opponent escapes to c1. And now, yes, we deliver checkmate. In this other example, our king did not fulfill his role as the queen's helper. So, the opposing king will capture the queen because she can't deliver checkmate on her own. So, the king captures the queen, and the game is drawn due to insufficient material since neither side has enough material to deliver checkmate. Before continuing with the details of this checkmate, I want to make sure you understood the two checkmate patterns. So you are playing with the black pieces, and it's your turn to make a move. You must deliver checkmate. Pause the video and I'll meet you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. To deliver checkmate, queen to g2. We use the pattern where the king is the helper and the queen, at the same time, is both the hunter and the guard. In this other example, deliver checkmate. Pause the video. The queen moves to b2 and delivers checkmate. The king acts as a helper. And in this other example, you can make two different moves to win the game. Try to figure them out. Pause the video. Here you can use the king as a helper and the queen delivers checkmate. Going back, you can also use the king as a guard. He is guarding the square since he is in opposition, and the queen moves to g1 and delivers checkmate. So in this position, you can choose between the two checkmate patterns, and in this position, what is the winning move? Pause the video here. Our king is in opposition, acting as a guard. And the queen has access to the diagonal until she reaches the square at h1 and delivers checkmate. The king is acting as a guard. The queen acts as both guard and hunter, delivering the check. And in this last exercise, what is the winning move? Pause the video. Queen to a1, operating along the diagonal as both hunter and guard of the square at g1. And the king is serving as a guard, guarding these two squares. In opposition, and how do you drive the opposing king to the edge of the board? Sometimes you might be lucky enough that your opponent makes it easier for you to win. In this example, the king is poorly positioned on the edge of the board. To which square should the queen move to trap the king? On the H file, pause the video. Should she move? to the square at g8. Now the king is trapped on the h file and can't escape from this file, allowing you to deliver checkmate. What should we do? Bring our king closer until we reach one of the two patterns I taught you and deliver checkmate. Obviously, most of the time, your opponent will try to make it as difficult as possible for you to win. Because, as you may know, if you simply can't find a way to checkmate your opponent within 50 consecutive moves, the game will also inevitably end in a draw. Let me explain better when the 50 moves happen, that is, 50 moves by black and 50 moves by white. If neither player moves a pawn or makes a piece capture for 50 consecutive moves, then a draw must be officially claimed at that specific point in the game. It's not in this position, but if there were other pawns or pieces with each pawn move, you start counting the 50 official moves all over again. Also, if there is a capture, you also start counting the 50 moves again. Going back to our example, the key point to drive the opponent's king to the edge of the board is to trap the king in squares. The squares in red are the ones we control with our king and queen. And here you can imagine it as if it were a house. So this whole area here is a really big area that we are not controlling. So the tip I'm going to teach you is that you'll notice this area, which is represented by the green squares, will get smaller until we manage to trap the king at the edge of the board. So I'm going to teach you step by step how to do this. It's our turn to move, and we go with the queen to the d5 square, with the goal of closing off the square. Now, the king can't go past the 5th rank, and also can't go past the d file. So his space has gotten much smaller. Now it's his turn to make a move. He will try to stay closer to the edge of the board to prevent our queen from closing off the square again. So he moves his king to e3. Since we can't make the space smaller with our queen, so we should bring our king closer. King to c3. The side with the queen will always have the choice to either make the opponent king's space smaller or to bring their own king closer. The opponent will stay in this square on f4, which is the best square for him, because here he doesn't let our queen shrink his space. So let's leave the queen in her place and advance with the king. To control this square, since the opponent's king is playing this game with our king, king to d3. And now he is forced to move toward the edge of the board. King to g3, and in the square on f4, we can shrink the opponent king's space, queen to f4. So notice that the space has become much smaller. King to g2. And this square is safe for our queen to go and reduce the space even further. With any of these moves, the king will be confined to the edge of the board. On our next move, if the king goes to h3, then we play queen to g5, keeping him trapped on the edge of the board. Going back to the position, if he plays to g1, we move our queen to d2, also keeping him trapped on the edge of the board. Going back to the position, if he goes to h1, here we need to be careful. Remember the stalemate technique? That is exactly right. The opposing king is hoping that we will make a critical mistake and accidentally draw the game. Because if we decide to play the move of queen to g3, well, that is it. The opposing king has absolutely nowhere to go, and he has no other pawn or any other piece that can legally move. He is also not currently in check right now, which means the game is officially a stalemate and is drawn. This is a frustrating result that we must work hard to avoid during our play. We let victory slip through our fingers. Going back to the position, what is the correct square? Queen to g4, closing off the square, and leaving one square open for the king to keep moving until our king gets close enough to deliver checkmate. King to h2, king to e2, king to h1, king to f2, king to h2. And now we can choose whichever checkmate pattern we prefer. We can deliver checkmate. Here on the h4 square, using the king as a guard since he is in opposition, and the queen as both guard and hunter, returning to the position. Alternatively, we can also choose to play the queen to g2, effectively using the king as a powerful assistant, while the queen acts as both a protective guard and a lethal hunter. In this other example, sometimes you might face an opponent who will cooperate in the checkmate because they don't know that to make this checkmate harder, the best position is to try to keep their king in the center to force a draw by the 50-move rule. But sometimes you might be lucky and your opponent, he himself ends up moving toward the edge of the board, thinking that the best solution is to run away with the king, far from the queen. But in these moments, you should take advantage because this is an opportunity. You keep advancing with the queen and keep shrinking his space. The space keeps getting smaller and smaller, and with just the queen, you managed it. Of course, with his help. This is a different example from the previous one, where our king was much more active and the opposing king got trapped on the edge of the board with only 2 squares left. Now, what we need to do is bring our king closer until we deliver checkmate. Here again, there are several possible squares where we can deliver checkmate. You can choose any of these squares. So, checkmate. Now I'll give you a brief summary. So what did we do? The objective is to make the opposing king's space or his prison smaller and smaller using the queen. If you can't reduce the space with the queen, you should bring your king closer and keep shrinking the space until he reaches the edge of the board. When he reaches the edge of the board or is about to reach the edge, you need to be careful. Be careful not to stalemate the opposing king, because that would be a draw. You should also be mindful of the 50-move rule. But if you follow the technique I taught you of closing off the squares, you don't even need to worry about that rule, the 50-move rule. You'll have plenty of time to deliver checkmate. Another thing you need to watch out for is not to lose your queen. Because if you lose your queen, the game will also end in a draw. And finally, I don't know if you noticed, throughout the technique I taught you, how many times did the queen give check? Do you remember? Just once. Which was the checkmate. So if you apply the technique correctly, your queen will give only one check, and that will be the checkmate. The entire technique consists of using the queen with the help of your king to gradually reduce the space available to the opposing king until you trap him at the edge of the board. Okay, I want to do some exercises where you have to choose the best square for your queen, the one where she can reduce the space of the black king. So, it's your turn to make a move. What is the best square for your queen to go to and restrict the king's space? Opponent's space gets smaller. Pause the video. I'll meet you soon with the solution. Let's go to the solution. Here, the best square is queen to b4, making the opponent's space very small. In this next example, what is the best square? Pause the video. The best square is queen to c7. And in this other example, what is the best square? Pause the video. Here, the best move is for the queen to come along the diagonal and position herself on f4. And now, what is the best square? Pause the video. The queen comes along the c-file and positions herself on c3, closing off the space. And in this position, what is the best square? Pause the video. The queen comes along the diagonal to the square on c4 and closes off the space. Last test. What is the best square? Pause the video. The queen comes along the c-file and goes to the square on c2. We've reached the end of this lesson. I taught you 2 patterns for delivering checkmate. You also learned about the roles of the pieces, the assistant, the guard, and the hunter. I taught you step by step how to drive the king to the edge of the board and deliver checkmate. We did several exercises to reinforce this knowledge. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this lesson in our course, How to Play Chess. You've reached a very important stage where you learned how to deliver your first checkmate. Congratulations. Now keep going with me. Let's move on to the next lesson. Hello there, and a very warm welcome to this comprehensive lesson all about the powerful rook. In this specific lesson today, I am going to teach you exactly how the rook moves across the board, precisely how the rook captures your opponent's pieces. And then I will provide you with several helpful exercises designed to help you fully solidify and reinforce all of this new knowledge you have gained. Are you ready to begin? Then let's get started. Here we have only the two kings and the rook on the board. So the rook is capable of moving to a wide variety of different squares. It can choose to move just a single square or multiple squares, provided it always travels in a straight line. This movement occurs either horizontally along the specific row, also known as a rank, or vertically along the column, referred to as a file, related to its current square. So, in this specific example, the rook can move to any square along the entire length of column C, and also to any square across the horizontal span of the fourth row. With an empty board, regardless of exactly which specific square the rook is currently placed on, it will always have a total of 14 different squares that it can choose to move to. The rook after the queen. The rook and the queen are the most powerful pieces. It is the second strongest piece on the board, second only to the queen. Here, I will make some moves with the rook so you can see how it moves. Here, it gives a check. King to f7, rook to b8. So, that is exactly how the piece moves across the board. It always travels strictly along the vertical column related to its square, and the horizontal row that is directly related to its current square. In contrast, the rook will never, under any circumstances, move along the diagonals. So here, along the diagonals, it will never move. King to d7, rook to f5. When there are many pawns and various other pieces remaining on the board, its overall mobility is significantly more restricted. Here, in this specific scenario, the rook does not have the ability to leap over the pawn, nor can it jump over the king. Rook to b3, pawn to h3. The rook captures in the same way that it moves. Here, it can capture the pawn by occupying its square. The pawn is removed from the board. Pawn to f5, rook to f3, attacking the unprotected pawn. The rook's attack reaches up to the pawn. The rook is not attacking these squares that are behind the pawn. King to a7, rook captures the pawn. There is a special move with the rook, which is castling, and it is performed together with the king. I will talk more about this move in a specific lesson. Here we have the initial position of the pieces. Notice that the rooks have no mobility. They are blocked by the pawn and the knight. Now an exercise. Which squares can the rook go to? Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Let's go to the solution. The rook can move to any of these specific squares marked in green, which includes the option of capturing this black pawn on f7. Right? Now, looking at this position on the board, which of these available squares are actually safe for the rook to move to without being captured? Take a moment to evaluate the board carefully. Pause the video. The safe squares are the ones marked in green. The rook cannot go to these squares because it will be captured by the king. It also can't go to the square on f6 because it will be captured by the pawn. And the same happens if it goes to the square on g4, where it will be captured by this other pawn. In this position, the opponent also has two pieces on the board, the queen and the rook. Which squares are safe for the rook to go to without being captured? Pause the video. Let's go to the solution. Currently, the rook has only 4 specific squares it can safely move to. On every other available square on the board, it faces immediate danger and can be easily captured by a variety of pieces, including a simple pawn, the king himself, the powerful queen, or even the opposing rook. You must be extremely careful with its placement. So here, on these squares, it can be captured by the king. On these squares, by the queen, several squares by the queen, here by the pawn, and by the queen. The rook attacks this square and also the square on f7, which is also being attacked by the queen. So, most of the squares are dangerous for the rook. In this other position, is this a check or a checkmate? Pause the video. The rook is giving a check. It is possible to block the check, but only for a short time. Then, the rook delivers checkmate. And the last exercise, check or checkmate. Pause the video. Here, the rook is giving a check, but the queen controls this diagonal. So, it is possible to capture the rook, and thus, this was just a check. We have now reached the end of this chess lesson. You have learned exactly how the rook moves across the board and how it captures opposing pieces, as well as completed several exercises to help reinforce your new knowledge. You should now feel much more confident using the rook in your future games. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Stay with me. Let's go. Hello there, and a very warm welcome to today's chess lesson. In this session, we are going to explore exactly how to deliver a successful checkmate using only a king and a rook against a solitary lone king. Throughout this lesson, you will learn two distinct and effective methods to drive the opposing king all the way from the center of the board to the very edge of the board. The first specific method I will show you is known as the house method, which is actually quite similar to other techniques you may know, to the method I taught you in the lesson about checkmating with a king and queen against a king. The second method I will teach you is the king method, which is also widely used to deliver this checkmate. Are you ready to begin? Then please stay right here with me. Let's go ahead. The rook, much like the powerful queen, is always considered a major piece because when it is assisted by your own king, it is entirely possible to deliver a checkmate and to deliver this checkmate. The fundamental principle is exactly the same as the king and queen checkmate strategy against a lone enemy king. You must trap the opposing king on the edge of the board. Here, our king is in opposition. He controls, like a guard, these three squares, and the rook hunter delivers checkmate, also acting as a guard over these two escape squares. This is another similar position. The king has gained the opposition, acts as a guard, and the rook hunter delivers checkmate. The same position with the king on the 8th rank. If the king is in one of the corners of the board, then you don't need to have your king in opposition, since it's enough to control these two squares and deliver checkmate here. A very similar position with the king on the square. On h1, the king acts as a guard controlling the two squares and the rook hunter delivers checkmate. In this position, it's the same setup, so you can deliver checkmate with the opposing king. In the corner of the board, so you don't need to have the kings in opposition. Can your king stay here? Of course, if the king is in opposition, it will also be mate, since he will be controlling the two escape squares. When the king is on another square along the edge of the board, not in the corner, then you need the king to be in opposition to deliver checkmate, as I showed you in the previous examples. Now, I want to make sure you understood the lessons I taught you. I'm going to give you a short test with just 3 questions. Let's go to the first one. You are playing with the white pieces, it's your turn to move, and you need to deliver checkmate. What move will you make to deliver checkmate? Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Let's see the solution. The king is in opposition, controlling the 3 squares, and the rook is the hunter. So it moves to the A file and delivers checkmate. Here's another exercise. It's your turn to play and you must deliver checkmate. Pause the video. The opposing king is in the corner of the board, so our king doesn't have to stay in opposition. The hunting rook moves to f8 and delivers checkmate. Last exercise. You must deliver checkmate in just one move. Pause the video. The king is in the corner of the board. Our king acts as a guard, controlling these two squares, so the rook moves to a4 and delivers checkmate. Sometimes you might be lucky enough for your opponent to make your victory easier. In this example, the king is poorly positioned on the edge of the board. To which square should the rook move? To trap the king on the first rank, it should go to h2. The next step is to bring our king forward. The king is attacking the rook. You keep the rook on the second rank, well away from the king. We bring the king closer to the third rank. And when you have opposition, you deliver checkmate. If the opponent moves to e1, we have opposition and deliver checkmate. Going back to the position, of course the opponent will try to make it difficult, so he will bring the king to g1. We advance with the king. Notice that we are forcing the opponent's king to have no escape and be forced into opposition. Here, if he enters into opposition, you deliver checkmate. Is he forced to run to the corner of the board? And we advance once more. And now the king has no way out. He can't escape anymore. The kings enter into opposition. And you deliver checkmate. This is another example. The king is badly positioned on the edge of the board. So what is the move to trap the king on the h file? Pause the video. You bring the rook to the square on g6. Now, the king is trapped on the h file. The king threatens to capture the rook. You move the rook away, keeping the king trapped on the file. And now we start bringing our king closer. The trick is to force the opposing king to end up face to face with our king, with the kings in opposition. If he wants to make our victory easier, he goes to the square on h5 and then we deliver checkmate. But he won't do that. We bring our king closer. The king threatens to capture the rook, so you move the rook away. Since the trick is to get the kings face to face, it doesn't help at all to move our king. Because if we put our king in front first, it doesn't work. Because since it's the opponent king's turn to move, he simply steps aside, returning to the previous position. The same thing happens if you move the king to the square on f5. Making that move doesn't help at all. So, the best thing is to make a waiting move with the rook. A waiting move is a move that doesn't harm your position. You keep your king well placed. Now, if the opponent goes to the square on h4, he gets checkmated. So he's forced to go to h2. You move your king forward. He can't move up to the square on h3. He's forced to go to the corner of the board, so it's the same thing. And now he's forced to move. And he'll have to put his king face to face with yours. At this moment, you deliver checkmate. And how do you drive the opponent's king to the edge of the board? Obviously, most of the time, your opponent will try to make it as hard as possible for you to win. Because if you can't deliver checkmate within 50 moves, the game will also end in a draw. Unlike the queen, the rook alone can't force the king to the corner or edge of the board. The rook needs the help of the king for this task in this position. The king is in the center, and he'll try to stay there as long as possible. As I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, I will teach you two methods to drive the king to the edge of the board. The first will be this one, which is the house method, very similar to the method I taught you in the queen and king versus king endgame. The essential key point of this method is to effectively imprison the king, as if he were held in a secure prison or inside a house, by building solid walls all around him. And at every moment, you keep making this prison, this house, smaller and smaller, and then you deliver checkmate it's our turn to make a move. So, we can start defining the opponent king's house by placing our rook on the square at a5 or on the square at d8. Let's go to the square at d8. All the green squares represent the size of the opponent king's house. Opponent, so it's still a pretty big house. The king remains in the center and will stay around there, moving to the square at e5. We bring our king closer with the goal of supporting the rook, so that, together with the king, it can close off the house. King to e4, staying in the center. Rook to d5. So the king is protecting the rook. And now it has closed off the house. So you can notice that the house is much smaller now. It's now about 25% of the board in size. King to e3. So since it's not possible to make the house any smaller yet, for example, if we bring our rook to d4, the king would capture the rook, so we bring our king closer to support the rook. King to e4, we still can't make the house smaller because if we put the rook on d4, the king escapes. So we position our king better, gaining the opposition. King to f4. The rook still can't make the box smaller, but our king can improve his position by going to d4 and gaining the opposition. So, see how important it is for you to gain the opposition, thus forcing your opponent to retreat. Here in the box, there's an escape route, but now, since you can make the box smaller with the rook, you protect these squares. And we managed to make the opponent king's box even smaller. Opponent. The best square for the opponent's king is the one closest to the center at f4. With the rook, we can't play because we can't make the box smaller, and we also can't leave it unprotected. So here it's better to make a waiting move with the king going to d5. And now the king is forced to retreat, going to the square at f3. Can we make the box smaller? Yes, we can. Rook to e4. We make the box even smaller. King to g3. Can we make the box smaller with the rook? No, we can't. So what do? We improve our king's position, getting closer to the opponent's king. King to f3. We also can't improve the rook's position by closing the box. So king to f5, king to f2. Notice that we are repeating the same pattern as before, bringing the king closer, now gaining the opposition. The box opened an escape route, the king tries to escape, and you manage to make the box even smaller. King to f2, we can't make the box smaller with the rook, so let's improve our king's position. King to e4, king to g2. And now, yes, rook to f3, reducing the size of the box even more. King to g1. Since the box can't be made smaller, we advance with our king. King to g2. We also can't reduce the size of the box. King to e2, king to g1, positioning himself at the edge of the board. So, when the king is at the edge of the board, what do? Let's keep him trapped at the edge of the board. So now, the king has only one escape square available. King to h1. Since there's only one escape square available, if we move our king to f1, what happens? The game is drawn. The king is stalemated. Going back to the position, the best move is king to f3, leaving one square free. Or, as we also say, leaving some air for the opponent's king. The only square is g1, king to g3. The king is forced to go here, to the edge of the board. And here you also need to be careful. If you play rook to g2, then the game is drawn. The correct move to deliver checkmate. The king acts as a guard, controlling both squares. You play rook to f1 and deliver checkmate. Now a test. It's your turn to make a move. What is the best square to place your rook in order to close off the opponent king's square? Opponent? Pause the video. The best square is rook to e4. Here, we managed to close off the opponent king's square. Opponent? Here's another test for you to solve. The rook has trapped the opponent's king in the square, but the king is attacking the rook. It's your turn to make a move. What is the best move you can make? Pause the video. If you move the rook away, you will increase the size of the box. So, the best move is to protect the rook with your king and keep the opponent's king trapped in the small box. Now I'm going to teach you the king's method. With the king's method, you will always use the rule of opposition to keep pushing, together with the rook, the king, towards the edge of the board. So, as I taught you before, it's no use bringing our king to the square on e3, aiming to have the kings in opposition, because since it's the opponent's king's turn to move, he moves the king and always gets out of opposition. So, there's no point in you just moving your king around. Going back to the position, the rook is cutting off the opponent's king on the 4th rank. You improve your king's position by moving to e3. If the opponent brings the king to d5, staying in opposition, you check with the rook. The opponent's king can't escape to these squares because we're controlling them with our king, and he's forced to retreat. So, this is the basic idea behind the king and rook checkmate method. You need to get the kings face to face, and when they're facing each other, you check with the rook and force the opponent's king to retreat. Going back to the position, of course, the opponent he'll try to make things harder and move his king to f5. What do? You need the kings to be in opposition. So you advance with your king, he runs away, you advance with your king, he runs away, and here you advance with your king again. If he makes things easier and retreats to the h6 square, what do? He gave up that rank, so you simply advance the rook and then you keep advancing with your king. He'll go back to the edge, you get closer, and if he stays in front, you check with the rook and force him to go back. Going back to the position, of course the opponent won't make it easy and he'll go to the g5 square even though it's bad for him. But he forces you to make one more move. Kings. They are facing each other. What's the rule? You give a check and force the king to go back. And now the same procedure. You keep bringing your king closer and force a situation where the kings are in opposition. The king attacks our rook and you pull the rook back. Here we are in that position where it's better to leave our king positioned on the d4 square. And what we need to do is a waiting move. If the opponent puts their king directly in front of ours, we give a check and force the opponent to retreat. But he won't do that. He'll try to escape. And then we follow with our king. Once he reaches the edge, we bring our king closer, and now he's forced to face us. You give a check, and again, he's forced to retreat. Again, you keep bringing your king closer. The king attacks the rook, and you move the rook away. Now, it's important to keep our king well positioned on the d5 square, and we make a waiting move. If the opponent goes to d7, we give a check and he'll end up on the 1st rank. But he won't do that. He'll try to escape and then we keep closing in. He reaches the edge, we bring our king right next to him. He's forced to stand face to face and you give a check, forcing him onto the last rank. And now, on the last rank, you keep using the same system. Attack the rook, you move it away. We have to make a waiting move to keep our king well positioned. Because there's no point in moving the king, because then he gives up the opposition. Make the move with the rook. If he comes to the square on e8, what do? Checkmate. You win the game. Going back to the position, he will escape to c8, and you bring your king closer. Bring the king closer. He reaches the 5th rank. Bring the king closer. He's forced to stand face to face. And you deliver checkmate. So this is the king's method. What's the difference between the two methods? This king's method. You can notice that it's a more automatic rule. You force the opposing king to stand face to face with your king, then you go with your rook and give a check, and he's forced to retreat. And so, you always use this same rule until you bring the opposing king to the edge of the board and deliver checkmate. So, it's a more automatic rule. You don't need to think much to apply this rule. But on the other hand, It's a rule that requires more moves for you to deliver checkmate. Since you have 50 moves available, that's a lot of moves. So, just to give you an idea, we used a total of 32 moves to deliver this checkmate. Using the box method, which I explained to you earlier for that position, we used 21 moves, so quite a bit less. But on the other hand, we had to think with each move about the best square for our king and the rook, so you could always keep closing off the squares. Then you might ask me, but Professor, which is the best method? That really depends on the student. You should choose the method that works best for you, the one you feel confident applying. Okay? I hope you enjoyed this lesson. This checkmate is harder to execute than the king and queen versus king checkmate. But by knowing these two methods that I taught you, you will have the confidence to win the game when you get the chance to reach this end game. So, in this lesson, I taught you the step-by-step of the king and rook versus king checkmate. You learned two methods to drive the king to the edge of the board. We did some knowledge tests. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Stay with me. Let's go. Hello there, and a warm welcome to this lesson I'll be presenting to you today about the bishop. In this lesson, you are going to learn how the bishop moves across the board, the way in which it captures opponent pieces. And you will also be completing several practical exercises to reinforce your knowledge. Are you ready? Then stay with me. Let's get started. The bishop is considered a minor piece because when alone with its king, it is not possible to deliver checkmate, resulting in a draw due to insufficient material. The bishop moves diagonally across any number of vacant squares that are connected to its starting square, provided they share the same color. Here we have a specific bishop that is currently positioned on a light square. When you first start a game of chess, you will always have two bishops at your disposal. This particular one moves strictly along the light squares, while the other bishop is restricted to moving only along the dark squares throughout the entire match. Here, in this position, we have only one bishop, and I am showing you how it moves. So as you can see here, this specific bishop piece can freely move to any of these highlighted squares that are clearly marked in green on the board. It goes to c4 and will continue moving only along the diagonals that are connected to its square, which will always be light. This bishop will never go to a dark square. And also, the bishop will never move along the ranks or files. It will always move along the diagonals. Notice that when the bishop is occupying the smaller center, with the board empty, it has 13 squares to go to. As it moves away from the center, the number of available squares decreases. Here, it is occupying a square in the larger center, and its range has decreased to 11 squares. Now it covers 9 squares, and when it reaches the corner of the board, it is only covering 7 squares. Bishop on c6 gives a check, and the king escapes the check. With other pieces on the board, the bishop's mobility is reduced. Wherever it is positioned, it does not jump over other pieces. So the bishop cannot jump over this pawn and also cannot jump over this king, just as this bishop also cannot jump over any other piece. In this position, it's our turn to make a move, and the opponent is attacking our bishop with their rook. So here we are going to protect the bishop by moving it to c6. These green squares are places where our bishop can move safely without being threatened on the next turn. And these red squares, at the moment, are squares that are being attacked by the opponent's team. If the opponent makes a move with the king, for example, that's a bad move for them, because it sets up the trap I'm about to show you. The bishop goes to the square f3 and gives a check. Look how interesting this is. The bishop attacks the king and the rook at the same time. The name of this move is a fork. The king escapes the check, and then we capture the rook. Going back to the position, the best move for the opponent would be to bring the rook here to h7 and attack the king, giving a check. the king would escape to c8 and the rook is well positioned on the 7th rank. In the initial position, the bishop is immobile. Its mobility is 0. When you advance the pawn, it already has a path so it can develop later. Here, just to show, we also advance the pawn. Afterwards, the bishop could develop to a more active square. Now a test for you. We are playing with the black pieces. It's the opponent's turn to move, and he moves his pawn, attacking our bishop. Which are the safe squares our bishop can go to? Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Let's go to the solution. This square we can't go to because the pawn is attacking it. Here, the bishop is attacking it. These two squares he can escape to. On this square, the bishop is attacking, but since our king is protecting it, it's a good square we can go to. We will only exchange the bishops. But as for this other square and this one, our bishop can't go there because the king is attacking. Let me mark the squares in red. So, looking on this other diagonal, these are additional squares that our bishop can go to safely. And what about capturing this pawn right here? Is that a move we can actually make right now? No, we definitely can't, because this pawn is safely defended and protected by that other pawn over there. In this exercise, we are playing with the black pieces, and the white pieces have captured our pawn. Notice that the rook is attacking the bishop and we can't move the bishop away because that would be an illegal move. It would leave our king in check. So, what move could we make? What is our best move? Pause the video. Our best move is to protect the bishop. How can we protect it? With the rook. Here, we protect the bishop. In this last exercise, we are playing with the black pieces and it's our turn to make a move. The king is threatening the bishop, but the bishop is being protected by our queen. If the bishop moves, the queen puts the king in check and the opponent will be forced to defend the king to get him out of check. So now it's your turn to play. In your opinion, what is the best square for our bishop to go to? The square that guarantees victory. Pause the video. The best square is to attack the queen. Bishop to b2, giving a check. Look at this interesting move. The opponent is forced to defend against the check, and at the same time that we create a threat with the check, we create another threat with the bishop attacking the queen. So, your opponent is completely unable to defend the queen, because first he needs to address the immediate and pressing problem that his king is currently in check. King to c2, and then the bishop captures the queen, and then queen to g5, giving a check. We capture the pawn, and, as you already know, in this particular endgame, now I will accelerate the sequence of these remaining moves. You just need to follow step by step the exact checkmate I taught you with king and queen against king to successfully secure a victory in this specific game. Now for the check or checkmate exercises, we are playing with the black pieces. It's our turn to make a move. Is this a check or a checkmate? Pause the video. This is just a check. We can block the check. And what about this one? Check or checkmate? Pause the video. Here, it's only a check. We can capture the queen. And this exercise? Our bishop is giving a check. Is it check or checkmate? Pause the video. The opponent can block the check by giving a check to our king, but then our bishop captures the queen and delivers a checkmate. And in this last exercise, we are playing with the white pieces. It's our turn to make a move. Check or checkmate? Pause the video. It's only a check. We capture the pawn and get out of check. We've reached the end of this lesson. You learned how the bishop moves and how it captures. Besides that, we did some exercises on the bishop's movement, as well as check and checkmate. So thank you very much for staying with me until the end. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Stay with me. Let's go! Hello and welcome to the lesson. Today we are going to learn how to deliver a checkmate using two major pieces. In this lesson, you will learn step by step. In this lesson, we will learn how to deliver a checkmate using a queen and a rook, or by utilizing two powerful queens. or even two coordinated rooks, in order to quickly win this essential type of chess endgame. Are you ready to start? Then stay with me. Let's go. This specific type of checkmate is actually very easy to execute, and you definitely don't need your king to help you out in these particular endgame situations. You can safely allow your king to remain at rest and leave him sitting comfortably on his throne, simply observing the two of them from a distance. These major pieces can effectively handle all of the heavy lifting and work by themselves, without needing any extra help or assistance from the king. I will teach you a simple method in which you alternate moves between the two major pieces. And in this way, you drive the opposing king to the edge of the board where you will deliver mate. Notice that the queen is protecting the rook and the rook has cut off the opposing king. On the g-file, you move the queen and give a check. The king can't escape to the g-file because the rook is blocking that file. The queen blocked the f-file and he is forced to escape to the e-file. Next, the rook is now free since the queen is covering the f-file, and you move the rook cutting off the e-file. So, the king can't move forward to the f-file because the queen is controlling that file and he is forced to go to the d-file. Now the queen is free since the rook is cutting off the e-file and you make the move with the queen. So, the same thing is going to happen. The king is forced to go to the c-file. The rook is now free and you move the rook. And the king is forced to go to the b-file. The queen is now free. The rook is controlling the c-file. And you move it to the b-file, where the king cannot capture the rook because the queen is protecting the rook, and he is forced to the edge of the board. And in this case, the queen will be the guard, guarding the escape squares, and the rook will be the hunter piece, delivering checkmate. In this other position, we have two major pieces, one on each side. The queen is free because the rook is controlling the file, G. So you move the queen, forcing the king to go to the file, and now the rook is free. You move the rook, the king goes to the d file. Here you need to be careful because if you move the queen to the square on d1, then you lose the queen. Going back to the position, when the two pieces are far apart from each other, when the king gets close and is about to attack the piece, you protect the queen using the rook. So here you give a check and force the king to move away. Once the king has moved away, now you can continue. The sequence of checks. We can continue using the queen, or we can also continue using the rook. So, here I'll show it using the queen, and then we'll go back to the example with the rook. Queen to d1 gives a check, king to c3, rook checks, king moves to the b file. You keep the queen and the rook on the same file to force the king to retreat. And next, the rook gives a check, king moves to a2, and queen to b2, delivering checkmate. The queen acts as both hunter and guard, controlling the escape squares. And the rook's role was as a helper, protecting the queen so she wouldn't be captured. Going back to the position, I showed the entire sequence using the queen. You could also do it with the rook, so the rook gives the check. King to c2. Queen on the same file to force the king to retreat. Queen to c1, giving a check. King retreats to the b file. The rook is now free. Rook to b8, check. King to a2. And again, queen to b2, delivering checkmate. In this other position, you have the freedom to choose which edge you want to drive the king to for checkmate. In this example, you can drive the king to the 8th rank, or you can also drive the king to the a file. So let's start with queen to c3, giving a check. On this path, the king will be driven to the a file to be checkmated. King to b5, rook to b4, giving a check. King to a6, queen to a3, delivering checkmate. Returning to the position. You could also play queen to e5, giving a check, and this route will drive the king to the 8th rank. King to c6, rook to d6, check, king to c7, queen to e7, giving a check, king to b8. And the rook delivers checkmate. Now we have two queens on the board, so you see that the procedure is the same. You keep forcing the king until he reaches the edge of the board and then deliver checkmate. The method also works with two rooks. The only thing you need to be careful about is not leaving your rook unprotected. Another tip I can give you is to always keep the rooks far from the opponent's king. When he gets close to the rook, you move it away from the king. So it works like this. The rook that is free gives the check, and the king moves toward the rooks with the aim of attacking one of them. So, always with the free rook, you keep giving checks. And now, when the king attacks the rook, you move the rook to the other side. King to b2. Here, if we move the rook to b1, we lose the rook. It's no use at all. If we bring the rook here to c1, like we did with the queen, the rook can't give check because it's protecting the other rook. So the best move is rook to d7, keeping them far away from the king. King to b3, rook to b7, check, king to a4, and the rook delivers checkmate. Here's a tip. If the opposing king is all ready, when you find yourself positioned right on the edge of the board, then you should immediately go and establish a solid wall to keep him completely trapped on the edge of the board. And next, you carefully line up your two major pieces to attack. Now the queen protected the rook, king to h4. And you can afford to choose which of the pieces will be the hunter. The rook can deliver checkmate, just as the queen can also deliver checkmate. Here's a little test. You are playing with the white pieces, and you must make the best move with the goal of delivering checkmate. Pause the video, and in a moment I'll meet you with the solution. Let's go to the solution. The rook is controlling the 6th rank and the queen is free. So the best move is queen to d7, giving a check, king to b8. And the hunter rook comes into play and delivers checkmate. So, in this type of endgame, you need to be careful not to stalemate the opposing king. Deliver checkmate in fewer than 50 moves and be careful not to lose one of your major pieces. Well, if you do lose, that's not a problem either. You already know how to checkmate with just a rook or just a queen. And so we've reached the end of this lesson. You have learned how to deliver checkmate with two major pieces. So I taught you using queen and rook, queen and queen, and two rooks. The method is the same, which is to force the king to the edge of the board until you deliver checkmate. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this lesson. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Stay with me. Let's go. Hello, welcome to the lesson in which I will explain in detail how the knight moves and how it captures. We will also do some exercises so you can solidify the knowledge I will teach you in this lesson. Are you ready? Then come with me. Is the knight considered a minor piece? Because when it is alone, together with its king, it is not possible to deliver checkmate. In a stark contrast to the capabilities of the bishop, even if you have two knights alone against the opposing king, it is actually impossible to force a checkmate through your own efforts alone. However, with two bishops against a lone king, you possess the power to systematically force a checkmate and ultimately win the entire game. And how does the knight move? You move two squares forward and then turn the corner. We can turn the corner to the left, and we can also move two squares and turn the corner to the right. So here, we move two squares up and turn the corner. We can turn to the left or we can turn to the right. We move two squares to the left. And now we can turn, break the corner. Since we can't go down here, we go this way. So that's the knight's move, the knight's movement. It's very similar to an L shape. So here it looks like we have an upside down L. In this other position, you can also see that it looks like an upside down inverted L. And here we also have an L, a sideways L. You can notice that when the knight moves, it leaves the color of one square and goes to a different color. So here it is on a dark square, and all three squares it can go to. In this move, all three squares are light. It can never go from a dark square to another dark square. It always has to go from a square of one color to a square of another color. So knight to e2. And on this square, it can move to any of these squares marked in green. So it's always the same move. Go to and turn the corner, either down or up. Here, go to. In this example, it's going 2 up and then turning the corner, either to the left or to the right. In this other example, it goes 2, it's moving to the right, and then turns the corner, either up or down. So that's how the knight's movement works. In this position, it has 6 squares to go to. As it gets closer to the center of the board, it increases its range of action. So here, the knight has 8 squares that it is attacking. Go to, turn the corner. 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 And as it gets closer to the edge of the board, its mobility becomes reduced. Here, there are 6 squares it can reach. Again, 6 squares, and now it only has 2 squares to go to when it is here, in the corner of the board. So go to and turn the corner. Go to and turn the corner. Here is the knight in its starting position. Another characteristic of the knight is that, unlike the other pieces, such as the rook, bishop, king, or queen, the knight can move in a unique jumping motion just like a real horse would, which means it has the special ability to completely vault over the top of any other pieces in its way. These can be pieces from your very own set of pieces, or even those belonging to the opposing player's side of the board. With this move, the knight has a range of 8 squares. If the opponent moves to the edge of the board, the knight becomes less active than our knight. Here, the range is only 4 squares. Another knight enters the game, moves to and turns the corner, and now the other knight is also activated. In this position, the knight is surrounded by pawns, by our pawns and the opponent's pawns. Can it get out? Yes, it can. It moves to and turns the corner. This is a safe square. It moves to and turns the corner, which is also a safe square. Moves to and turns the corner. Safe square. Moves to and turns the corner. Moves to and turns the corner. Oops, here is not a safe square. Moves to and turns the corner is a safe square. Moves to and turns the corner is also. Moves to and turns the corner is also a safe square. The opponent attacks our knight, and how does the knight capture? It captures in exactly the same way that it moves. So, it only captures enemy pieces that are occupying the last square of the L, that is, the square it will land on. So in this example, it can move to, turn the corner, capture the pawn, and the pawn is removed from the game. Here, it went to a position where it moves to and turns the corner. It is giving check, threatening the square where the opponent's king is. I explained to you that there are 3 ways to get out of check. Capture the piece that is giving the check. Block the check with another piece. And here comes. Another characteristic of the knight is that when the knight gives a check, you can't block the knight's check. Notice that there's no way to put a piece between the knight and the king to block the check because the knight can jump over other pieces. And it has this unique L-shaped movement. The other way to get out of check is, then, to escape with the king. It's attacking the knight. The knight goes to f4 again, giving a check 1 to 2 and turns the corner. It captures the pawn, gives a check, and this way I'm showing you how the knight is capturing the pawns. The opposing king can't even defend this pawn because this square is being attacked by the knight. It moves to and turns the corner, so the knight captures the other one. Now here's an exercise for you. Which squares can the knight go to without being captured? Pause the video, and in a moment I'll meet you with the solution. Let's see the solution. The opposing king has cornered the knight as the knight is at the edge of the board. The two squares it can go to, move to, turn the corner, move to, turn the corner, are being attacked by the king. In this next exercise, which squares can the knight go to without being captured? Pause the video. Let's see the solution. The knight can capture the queen. It can go to the square at e7. He can't occupy this square because it already has a resident who is a teammate, a pawn. This other square, he can't capture this pawn because the pawn is being defended by the queen. This other square he can't go to because the pawn is attacking that square. This other one he can't go to because the queen is occupying it. Here he can go. You might notice that sometimes, out of habit, I made a different knight move, but ended up on the same square. So, just now, I had the knight turn the corner and then move 2 squares. It's just a different way to reach the same spot. Since you're just starting out, always remember, move 2 squares and then turn the corner. But it also works if you turn the corner first and then move 2 squares. Okay? In this next exercise, which squares can the knight move to without being captured? Pause the video. Here, on any of these squares, it can be captured by the opponent's bishop. So, you can see that the bishop is controlling the knight because the knight is poorly positioned on the edge of the board. And in this position, which is a bit more complex, which squares can the knight move to without being captured? Pause the video. In this position, there is only one square the knight can move to without being captured. On this square, this knight is attacking it just like this square. This knight controls this one. If it were positioned here on the square at g1, it would be controlling both squares as well. Then our knight would not have any available squares to move to. Here the knight controls these 2 squares. And finally, this knight also controls these 2 squares. In this position, you are playing with the black pieces. It's your turn to make a move. Your opponent is giving a check. Is it a check or is it checkmate? Pause the video. This is just a check. The knight moves 2 squares, turns the corner, and we block the check. In this position, is it check or checkmate? Pause the video here. The knight can capture the queen. Moves 2 squares, turns the corner, and it's just a check. And in this position, you are playing with the black pieces and you have a move that can win the game. Can you see what that move is? Pause the video. The opponent's king is out of air, blocked by his own pieces. So, when he's out of air, the knight is the ideal piece to deliver checkmate. The knight moves 2 squares, turns the corner, check. It's not possible to block the check because the knight is giving the check. It's the only piece whose check cannot be blocked. The king can't escape because he's trapped, and it's also not possible for the opponent to capture our knight. So, checkmate. We've reached the end of this lesson. I taught you how the knight moves and how it captures. Besides that, we did several exercises to reinforce your knowledge. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this lesson. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Stay with me. Let's go. Hello, welcome to the lesson about castling. In this lesson, you will learn the general concept of castling. What is kingside castling? What is queenside castling? What is the main objective of castling? And what are its restrictions? Are you ready to start? So let's get started. Castling is a special move involving the king and the rook, and it is not a mandatory move. Castling is the only time that allows the movement of two pieces at once. In the same move, the king moves two squares and the rook jumps to his side. This is called kingside castling when it is done on the king's side. When castling happens on the queen's side, we call it queenside castling. When you are playing against the computer or online to castle, you just move your king two squares and the system will automatically place the rook next to the king. When you are playing a live game of chess on a traditional physical board, you must first carefully touch the king, then make the specific move with the king, and finally release the king on its new square. Only after that do you touch the rook, picking it up and placing the rook directly next to the king to complete the move. This specific order is very important, because in the game of chess there is a strict rule known as touched piece is played piece. This means that if you touch the rook first and then placed it on the f1 square, you would have already completed the move, which would then be officially recorded as the rook's move and nothing else. So, you should always touch the king first, move it two squares, release the king, then touch the rook and place the rook next to the king. Now I will introduce you to castling on the queen's side. It is done with the queen's rook on the queen's side, and the procedure is the same. You move the king two squares and the rook jumps over to stand next to the king. And what is the purpose of castling? Castling consists of changing the position of the king and the rook in a single move. Its purpose is to achieve a highly defensive formation. By castling, you protect the king behind pawns, and at the same time bring the rook to the central files of the board. This allows the rook to participate in the game immediately. The king moves two squares, the rook jumps over and stays beside him. The king is protected by the pawns and the rook quickly starts to play through the central files. If I move the king, the opponent moves the king, then I move the king back to the starting position. So, since I moved the king, I lose the right to castle. It is no longer possible to castle. The same thing happens if at any point in the game I move the rook, and even if it returns to its original position, I can't castle then. One of the restrictions for castling is that you cannot have moved the king or the rook with which you want to castle. Another restriction is that there cannot be any pieces between the king and the rook that will castle. The king also cannot be in check, and none of the squares the king passes through can be under attack by an opponent's piece. Because of course when the king moves to the side, he cannot put himself in check. This is an example of pieces in the way between the king and the rook. So the king cannot castle because this bishop is in the way. And here he also can't castle because the knight is in the way. In this example, the bishop is attacking a square that the king is on. So when he moves two squares, he would be threatened by the bishop. So it is not possible to castle. He also can't do queenside castling because the rook has already been moved. In this position, the bishop has checked the king and he is forced to defend against the check. He cannot use castling as a defensive alternative. First, he defends against the check. And then, when he is able to castle, he castles. In this position, we can't capture the piece giving the check, nor block it with another piece, so we are forced to move the king. So here, we lose the right to castle. In this other position, both squares are free for the king, and he is also not in check. There has not yet been any movement of the king or the rook. The path is clear, so it is possible to castle. And what about queenside castling? Is it possible to do it? The bishop is attacking one square, but it is not a square the king will pass through. So the king moves up to here. Therefore, it is possible to castle. Now a test. Analyze this position. Is it possible for us to castle? Pause the video. In a moment, I'll meet you with the solution. Let's go to the solution. Kingside castling is not possible because the knight is in the way. But for queenside castling, the path is clear. The king is not in check. The two squares that the king will pass through are not threatened by the opponent. So it is possible for us to castle, and in this position, castling is possible. Pause the video here. The opponent's knight is attacking two squares that the king needs to pass through to castle. So we can't castle kingside, and we also can't castle queenside. We made a move with the rook, confining the king to its first rank. The knight gives a check. Is it possible to castle? No, it's not possible. Why not? We are in check and we have to defend against the check. In this position, we are forced to move the king. Then we lose the right to castle. And here, the opponent has nothing they can do to defend against the checkmate threat. With the knight, they can't deliver a check from any square. So they make any move and then we deliver checkmate. We've reached the end of this lesson. You have learned what castling is, how kingside and queenside castling work, what their main purpose is, and their restrictions. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Stay with me. Let's go. Hello there, and welcome to this detailed lesson about the unique chess move known as en passant. En passant is a famous French expression that simply means in passing or while passing on the board. It is a specific tactical situation that only ever occurs between two opposing pawns, and it happens when your pawn has successfully reached the 5th rank. So our pawn is currently positioned on the 5th rank, counting up from the bottom, that is the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and finally the 5th rank. Now imagine your opponent advances their own pawn 2 squares forward with the specific intention of passing your pawn on the neighboring file, without having to engage in a fight with this pawn. It is only in this very specific case that you can decide whether or not you actually want to capture that pawn through the special rule. In other words, making this specific move is not mandatory at all, rather it is entirely optional. You can choose to exercise this unique opportunity to capture en passant only on the very next move immediately following your opponent's specific pawn advancement in Beijing. To clarify the situation, the opponent's last move was to advance their pawn forward 2 full squares from its starting position, essentially trying to sneak past our own pawn without being captured. Now it's our turn to make a move. So we have to decide whether or not we want to capture en passant. If we decide to move, for example, the king, then the opponent will make another move, and after that, we will no longer have the opportunity to capture en passant. So it is at this moment when the move happens that we have to decide whether or not we want to capture en passant. If we decide to capture this pawn en passant, how does it work? The capture is carried out as if the opponent's pawn had moved only 1 square. So you take your pawn, pretend that this pawn moved only 1 square, and capture the pawn en passant. Going back to the position, if the opponent makes the move of only 1 square, then here it is a normal position between the pawns, and you can decide whether you want to capture this pawn, advance 1 square, or also move your king. In this position, note that the opponent's pawn has already left its initial rank and the opponent advances the pawn 1 square. So in this position, we do not have the right to capture en passant. We are only permitted to exercise this specific right to capture when the opponent's pawn is still on its original starting square and advances forward by making a double-step move, consequently landing directly side by side with our own pawn on the 5th rank, which is exactly the case we see in this particular example. The pawn advanced 2 squares, it was on its initial square, and now we have the right to capture en passant. If instead we had moved the king and then the opponent, let's say, makes another move with the king, we no longer have the right to capture en passant. We lose the opportunity to choose. In this other position, the opponent advanced the pawn 2 squares. Can we capture en passant here? No, we cannot. It's a normal pawn move, and our pawn is not on the 5th rank next to the pawn. It's on the same rank. So here the pawns are blocked. Now let's do some tests. We're playing with the white pieces. It's the opponent's turn to move, and he advances the pawn to the square on f5. Is it possible for us to capture the pawn en passant? Pause the video. Yes, it is possible. The pawn was on its starting square, made its first move by advancing 2 squares, ending up next to our pawn, which is on the 5th rank. So here, if we want, we can capture en passant, but if we don't want to, we can make any other move, and now we no longer have the right to capture en passant. In this other test, it's the opponent's turn to move, and he moved his pawn to the square on f5. Can we capture en passant? Pause the video. Since the opponent's pawn did not come from its starting square, it was here on f6, meaning it had already moved once, we do not have the right to capture en passant. In this other position, the opponent advanced the pawn to the d5 square. Can we capture en passant? Pause the video. Yes, we can. The pawn was on its starting square, moved 2 squares at once, and here we have 2 pawns that can capture en passant. This pawn can capture en passant, and this other pawn can also capture en passant. In this other position, it's the opponent's turn to move, and he advanced the pawn to the square on b6. Can we capture en passant? Pause the video. The pawn was on its starting square, but it only moved 1 square. Besides that, our pawns are on the 6th rank, not on the 5th rank. So, as you can see in this specific case, we are actually unable to capture the pawn en passant right now. The rule is only valid when the opponent's pawn is on its starting square and our pawn is on the 5th rank. Then it jumps 2 squares in a single move with the intention of passing our pawn. Then we can choose whether or not we want to capture it. Now for the last test, it's the opponent's turn to move, and they played the pawn to the square on d5. Can we capture en passant? Pause the video. The pawn was originally sitting on its initial starting square, but it then moved forward 2 squares in a single move. Now, since it has landed directly next to our 2 pawns on the 5th rank, either of these pawns can choose to capture it using the en passant rule, Sanini Sadi. We have now reached the very end of this instructional lesson. You have successfully learned exactly what the en passant move is. And you also understand what its specific restrictions and requirements are in a game of chess. Furthermore, to ensure your success, I have provided you with several tests to help you reinforce and solidify the knowledge you have gained today. Thank you very much for your dedicated attention and for staying with me until the very end of this lesson. I will see you in the next one. I look forward to seeing you there. Stay with me. Hello, welcome to the lesson on checkmate in one move. The goal of this lesson is for you to practice checkmate in one move using different attacking pieces. In some exercises, you'll use the bishop. In others, you'll use the knight or the rook. There are also exercises where the queen will be the attacker, and in others, the pawn. It could be any attacking piece that delivers the checkmate. You can watch this lesson in 2 ways. The first is by watching the solution to all the exercises. The second is by pausing the video and trying to find the solution yourself. So, to accommodate both ways of watching this lesson, I want to agree with you on the following. Every time I say the phrase "analyze this position," I will then explain the solution right after. So if you just want to watch the lesson without trying to solve the exercise, you don't need to do anything. Just watch this lesson until the end. Now, if you want to solve all the exercises or even just some of them, when I say the phrase "analyze this position," pause the video because right after that I will give the solution. Deal? Are you ready to start? So, I want you to come along with me right now and let's go. We are currently playing with the white pieces, and it is finally our turn to make a decisive move on the board, because we have a very special opportunity here to deliver a powerful checkmate to our opponent. Analyze this position. This escape square is being controlled by our pawn as well as this other one. This escape square is being controlled by our king, and this escape square is controlled by both our king and the bishop. So the opposing king has no escape squares left to run to. When this happens, it's a clear opportunity for you to deliver checkmate. Here in this example, the piece that can be the hunter and deliver checkmate is the bishop. Bishop to f7 and checkmate. Analyze this position and deliver checkmate. The opposing king is in the corner of the board. Our king controls both squares. The king has only this escape square available. So the rook goes to the square on e8 and delivers checkmate. Analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board with no escape squares available. The king is controlling this square and the bishop is controlling this other square. So the knight will be the hunter piece and deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. This pawn of ours controls these two escape squares and our king controls these other two escape squares. So here the pawn advances to f7 and delivers checkmate. Analyze this position. Our king controls the three squares through opposition. The king has two escape squares, and the queen, acting as the hunter, goes to h1 and delivers checkmate. Analyze this position. The opponent's king is in the corner of the board. Our king controls this escape square and also this one. The knight is controlling this other escape square. So the bishop, acting as the hunter, is free to deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. Our king controls three escape squares. These two squares are open for the opponent's king. But when our rook moves to a7, it gives check and controls both escape squares. Checkmate. Analyze this position. The opponent's king is in the corner of the board, the rook controls both escape squares, and the king is defending the rook. The knight is free to act as the hunter and deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. This square is being controlled by the bishop. These two squares are being controlled by our king. So the pawn advances to g4 and delivers checkmate. Analyze this position. The king controls these three escape squares. So the hunting queen can deliver checkmate by moving to g4. And she can also deliver checkmate on h7. Here you deliver checkmate playing with the black pieces. It's your turn to make a move. Analyze this position. These two squares are being blocked by the white team. This is the only available square and it's being guarded by our pawn. So the hunting bishop is free to deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. The king controls the three escape squares and these other two squares. The rook can control and deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. These two escape squares are being controlled by the bishop. The king controls these other two squares. So the knight can move to the square at a2 and deliver checkmate. Besides this square, there is another square the knight can go to and also deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board. Our king controls this escape square, and also this other one together with the pawn. This pawn is being defended twice. It is being defended by this pawn and also by the bishop, which covers this diagonal. So we can advance safely. This other pawn, since the bishop protects the pawn on h7. And this pawn is the hunter and delivers the checkmate. Analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board. Our king controls these two escape squares. So here we have several moves that lead to checkmate. Queen to b8, checkmate. Queen to b7, checkmate. And here as well, any of these squares, the queen delivers the checkmate. Analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board. Those two escape squares are being controlled by our king. This other one, the knight controls. And the bishop is free to be the hunter and deliver the checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces. It's your turn to make a move, so analyze this position. The king is suffocating, blocked by his own pawns. So here, the rook goes to the square e1 and delivers the checkmate. Analyze this position. These two escape squares are being controlled by our pawn, and these other two are being controlled by our king. And the knight is free to be the hunter and deliver the checkmate. Analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board. These two escape squares are being controlled. The king and the knight control this escape square, and this other escape square is also controlled by two pieces, or rather one piece and a pawn. So since there is double control here, we can advance the pawn and deliver checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces, and it's your turn to make a move. Analyze this position. The king is locked in by his own pawns, so these three squares are blocked. All the queen needs to do is reach the first rank and deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. This escape square is controlled by the bishop, this other one by the pawn, and also by the bishop, this one by the king, as well as this one. This bishop is free to control this diagonal and deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. The pawn controls these two escape squares. This other one is being blocked by its own pawn. So, the rook goes to g1 and delivers checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces and it's your turn to move. Analyze this position. The king is suffocating, blocked by his own team. Two pieces and a pawn. And when that happens, for the knight, it's a perfect position. He goes to the square on f2 and delivers checkmate. Analyze this position. The king controls this escape square, and this other escape square is being controlled by the bishop and the pawn. So, we can free the pawn so it becomes the hunter and delivers checkmate. You are playing with the white pieces and have the opportunity to win the game. Analyze this position. The king has no escape squares left available. The pawn and the queen control this square, and the queen controls this other one. Since the pawn is controlling this square, it can be the helper the queen needs to deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board. These two squares are being controlled by the king, and this other square is being controlled by the bishop. So this other bishop is free to act along the diagonal and deliver checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces and have the chance to win the game. Analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board. These two squares are being controlled by the rook. This pawn controls this square, so it can be the helper the rook needs. Rook to h2 delivers checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces. So analyze this position. How many escape squares does the king have? Only one escape square. Who can control this square and at the same time deliver checkmate? The knight. Knight to h3 controls this escape square and at the same time delivers checkmate. Are you playing with the white pieces? Then analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board. This square is being controlled by our pawn, which will be the helper for this other pawn that will deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. The queen controls these three escape squares. The bishop is supporting this square and controlling this other one. So, the bishop can be the helper that the queen needs. She moves to the square on e7 and delivers checkmate. Analyze this position. The pawn controls these two escape squares. The king is controlling this one, and this escape square is open. But since it is a light square, our bishop can control this escape square and even deliver checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces, so analyze this position. The king has no available squares available to escape, so the rook takes advantage with the help of the king and delivers checkmate. Analyze this position. This square is being controlled by the king and by both knights, who have access to this square. This other square is being controlled by the king. This one is being controlled by this knight, so this knight is free to move, go to the square on b6, and deliver checkmate. You are playing with the white pieces, so analyze this position. This square is being controlled by the king, this other one by the king, the pawn, and the knight. And this other square is being controlled by the pawn. Since the knight is attacking this square, it can be the helper our pawn needs to deliver checkmate. You are playing with the white pieces, so analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board, and this square is being controlled by the queen and the rook. The knight has only one defender, which is the king. So the queen can safely capture this knight and deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. The king controls these two escape squares. These other two escape squares are being controlled by the knight. So there is only one escape square available, which is this one. The bishop can control this square and still deliver checkmate. Analyze. In this position, the king is trapped on his first rank or the 8th rank from white's perspective. So the rook moves to the square on h8 and delivers checkmate. In this scenario, you are playing as the white pieces. So take a moment to carefully analyze this complex position. You will notice that the bishop is perfectly positioned, effectively controlling the only available escape square for the opponent. Because of this restriction, the hunter knight is now free to leap in and deliver a decisive checkmate. Carefully analyze this winning position. This square and this other one are being controlled by our king. These other two squares by the pawn, and these three squares by the rook. So, it just needs to be a check for us to deliver checkmate. The king will be the helper. For the pawn to be the hunter and deliver checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces, so analyze this position. The king controls this escape square. The pawns are blocking the escape squares. For your king, the helper bishop is attacking this pawn, so the queen can safely come, capture the pawn, and deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. This escape square is being controlled by the knight. This other escape square is being controlled by the bishop. So there is only one escape square available. The bishop can take the diagonal, control this square, and still deliver checkmate. You are playing with the white pieces, so analyze this position. The rook controls these escape squares, and this hunting rook is free to deliver checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces, so analyze this position. These two escape squares are being controlled by the knight. The king has only one escape square available, so this knight, it can control this escape square and still deliver checkmate. Analyze this position. This escape square is being controlled by the pawn and this other one by the king. And here the pawn controls this last square. So we can promote the pawn to a rook, which will be checkmate. Or we can promote the pawn to a queen, which will also be checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces, so analyze. In this position, this escape square is being controlled by the king and this other one is available. The supporting knight attacks this pawn. So it can support the queen to capture the pawn, control this other escape square, and deliver checkmate. You are playing with the black pieces. Analyze this position. The king controls these two escape squares. This other one is being controlled by the bishop. And this one here is available. But here our bishop controls the diagonal, controls this square, and at the same time delivers checkmate. Analyze this position. The king is trapped on his first rank. You can deliver checkmate with this rook, and you can also deliver checkmate with this other rook. Are you playing with the white pieces? Analyze this position. The king is out of air. He can't escape to any of these squares. The hunter knight is free to deliver checkmate. We've reached the last exercise. You are playing with the black pieces. Analyze this position. The king is in the corner of the board. Our king controls this escape square. This other one is being blocked by the pawn. And here, the king can be the helper since he attacks this square. The bishop can capture the pawn and deliver checkmate. We've reached the end of this lesson. You had the opportunity to practice checkmate in one move using the pawn and the bishop, knight, rook, and queen. Thank you very much for staying with me. Until the end of this lesson,